The British government has said it has no plans to introduce travel restrictions on visitors from China as COVID rapidly spreads throughout the country.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on the 29th of December. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and Martin Daubney. Here's what's leading the news this morning. The UK will not reintroduce mandatory COVID tests for anyone arriving from China. That's despite the USA announcing just that from the 5th of January. All Chinese arrivals will need to provide a negative COVID test there before takeoff. It comes as UK Border Force staff begin the second in a series of strikes at UK airports until New Year's Eve.
And Pope Francis has said the former Pope Benedict XVI is very ill and he has asked pilgrims at the Vatican to pray for him. Benedict became the first leader of the Catholic Church to stand down in 600 years in 2013, citing advanced age.
And 2022 will be the warmest year on record for the United Kingdom. Aside from the summer peak, the Met Office said all 4 seasons in Britain this year were in the top 10 warmest since records began in 1884.
So is that a bad thing? Is it global warming or is it just weather? Let us know, get in touch all the usual ways via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews.uk and let us know where you're watching or listening from so we can give your town a shout out.
To our top story now, and the US has announced that all travellers from China must provide a negative COVID-19 test to enter the country, joining other nations imposing restrictions because of a surge of infections in China. However, the UK government has said it is not planning to follow suit.
The increase in cases across China follows the rollback of the nation's strict antivirus controls. Beijing's zero COVID policies had kept the country's infection rate low but fueled public frustration and crushed economic growth.
It comes amid more strike action as Border Force staff have begun the second in a series of strikes at UK airports until New Year's Eve. Rail disruption has also continued on Wednesday and Thursday, with the TSSA union members at Great Western Railway and West Midlands trains on strike. Driving examiners are continuing a rolling walkout too, which will continue until January.
OK, and joining us now in the studio is political commentator Albie Amakona. So, good morning, Albie.
Good morning.
So, lots to get our heads around there. First of all, let's start with COVID. So, a surge in cases. The USA has mandatory testing on its borders. Italy, 50% of passengers on 2 flights to Milan from China coming in testing positive. As a result of that, Italy has now introduced mandatory COVID testing, yet the UK has an open border. Is that wise?
Yes, I think that is the right decision to make. Look, ultimately, we either believe in the defences that we built up against COVID or we don't. We either believe in the vaccine or we don't. We either think it's time to get back to normal or we don't. I believe in the vaccine. I think it's time to get back to normal. Given that the majority of the population has been vaccinated, people should not be worried about COVID cases coming in from China. We know that closing the borders or indeed getting people to test for COVID before coming into the country during the first wave of the pandemic didn't necessarily stop the spread of the virus. So ultimately, I think this is a wise decision from the government.
I think what people will be concerned about is the fact that China has been closed off for the past 3 years. And they'll also be asking questions about how much we can trust the data coming out of China. I mean, there's talk of 5,000 cases a day, but there are suggestions that that could be closer to 1 million cases a day. And there will be concern that from these flights, as Martin just alluded to there, coming into Italy, 50% of them COVID positive. There's concern about what exactly we could be letting into this country, perhaps even new variants. Is that something to be concerned about, do you think?
I understand the concerns that people have, but what people should be worried about is not trust in China, but as I mentioned before, trust in our defences that we built up to COVID-19. We developed an amazing vaccine in this country. We had an amazing vaccine rollout programme. We built up some of the best defences to COVID in the world. This is not something which the public should be concerned about. It's time to get back to normal, and that means having borders open to international travellers and not making them test upon arrival.
A keep calm and carry on mindset there, Albie. It's very refreshing to see. OK, can we turn to domestic politics now? Rishi Sunak on the front page of the Daily Express today after the tragic deaths, of course, over the festive period. Ellie Edwards in Merseyside, Cody Fisher in Birmingham, pledging to make Britain's streets safer. But it's scant on detail. How can Rishi make British streets safer?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that the government is about 80% of the way to its target of hiring 20,000 more police officers by 2023. Yes, but that was a decision that was made around 10 years ago. We're talking about 2022, not 2012. So I think it's important to note that the government is on its way to meeting that target, which will go some way to making the streets of Britain safer. Also, another thing which is very important is, of course, working through that backlog, which we see in the courts, so we can get those conviction rates up. And ultimately, a much more proactive attitude towards crime is necessary for this government, especially when we've got Labour really chopping at the heels of the government.
I mean, Sunak has previously promised that he would like to see more criminals jailed. Is this in part to do with reforming our prison system as well as our judicial system?
It is about reforming our entire criminal justice system. You know, you're absolutely right to say that during the austerity years, we did see cuts across the board of public services, including in our criminal justice system. There needs to be more investment into policing, more investment into courts, and also more investment into jails. It's not a very politically eye-catching slogan to say we're going to invest more money into jails. But if the plan is to jail more people, of course, prisons are going to require more investment.
Two other details I'd like to pull out from this morning's papers, if I could, Albie. A former Metropolitan senior officer saying it's time to move towards having an armed British police force. Fight fire with fire. Is that something you'd like to see? Coppers with guns?
No, it's not something that I would like to see. It doesn't strike me as a very British solution to a problem which doesn't necessarily exist. Yes, of course, we are hearing a lot more about armed crime. But if you think about what is the biggest problem with violent crime in this country, it is knife crime. And the focus should absolutely be on methods to cut knife crime. And it's not necessarily clear to me that having an armed police force really changing the whole culture of policing in this country will solve that problem. I think stop and search, where we know it works, I think it can be a really powerful tool. If you speak to any parent whose child has been a victim of knife crime, they would never say they were anti-stop and search. We've got to be using methods which we know that work, because ultimately it's about saving lives and keeping people safe.
Should we touch on strikes? Because there's a fair few of them going on this week. Border Force, rail disruption this week. Driving examiners are out too. So that's just currently the next few days. But there have been comments in the papers this morning from the head of the TUC saying that strikes are only going to continue in 2023. In fact, they're going to escalate. Also accusing the government of stonewalling pay negotiations with unions. What's your prediction for the start of 2023? Could we start to see compromise, or do you think things are only going to escalate?
I think we will certainly see more strikes in 2023 because they're a feature of inflation running high. You know, sort of around 10% inflation is what we're looking at, and the target that the Bank of England has set for the country is 2%. So we're going to continue to see strikes until inflation comes down. The question is can the unions and the government come to a reasonable agreement on pay? I think most people agree that the 19% that the nurses are asking for is too much. But can there be a compromise found for the nurses and for other public sector workers?
Yeah, so Paul Nowak, the incoming TUC General Secretary, has said it's only a matter of time before we see coordinated strikes. I mean, I think we've already got them. You know, so unions joining up to cause maximum disruption. Rishi's got to get a grip quickly on this, hasn't he? Because we are heading back towards 1970s Britain.
I think we've got to approach those comparisons with 1970s Britain with caution.
I'm old enough to remember them.
I think at the peak of the strikes, I think there are around 11 million working days lost due to strikes. I think at the moment we're just on 1 million working days. So this is a factor of 10. So I think, yes, we can be concerned about the strikes, but let's not say this is back to the 1970s winter of discontent. I think the government absolutely needs to get a grip of this situation, and the unions and the government need to come to a reasonable compromise. But I wouldn't get too carried away with comparisons to the 1970s.
Well, it's our job to get carried away, and you've been an excellent contributor this morning. Thank you very much, Albie.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks,
See you again in a bit.
Now, Ukrainian officials are urging residents to evacuate from the city of Kherson as Russian forces have stepped up artillery attacks on the recently liberated southern Ukrainian city.
And some residents who lived through the Russian occupation are reluctant to leave despite the bombardment, according to a local official who has been involved in the evacuation.
Well, the war in Ukraine has rumbled on for nearly a year now, and Russian leader Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals if Ukraine continues to make gains in its successful counter-offensive. That's according to the former head of the British Army.
Speaking exclusively to GB News, General Lord Richard Dannett said strategic losses and rapidly falling morale could open the real possibility of Putin's enforced removal. But Lord Dannett told our Home and Security Editor Mark White it was vital the US, UK and other allies continue to stay the course in supplying Ukraine with state-of-the-art Western weapon systems.
For the better part of a year, Ukraine has been under relentless Russian bombardment. From missile strikes to tank and artillery fire, as Russian forces push to consolidate their gains. But in recent months, against seemingly insurmountable odds, the Ukrainians have been pushing back. A counter-offensive making key gains. Chief among them, recapturing the strategically important southern city of Kherson. The former head of the British Army believes if Ukraine can keep up that momentum in the months ahead, then the Russian president could find it increasingly difficult to cling on to power.
I could see a set of circumstances where the Russian military's morale would collapse. When you've lost the will to win, when you've decided that you're defeated in your own head, then you will lose. And of course, if that was to happen, that's a game changer. I think we would see a change of regime in the Kremlin. I think we would see Putin out.
There's no doubting the bravery and resolve of the Ukrainians, but it's sophisticated Western-supplied weapon systems that's helped give them the edge in many of their encounters with Russian forces. Lord Dannett says it's absolutely vital that the US in particular stands firm in its support of Ukraine.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
Also key is the continuation of the training of Ukrainian volunteers, particularly by Britain and Poland.
Yeah, so I'm going to place the TMH at the front. I'm going to ensure that the pins, are pulled out as we previously did, yeah?
Around 10,000 Ukrainians are being trained in the UK before returning home to take up the fight. In the months ahead, Ukraine has to keep up the momentum and continue making gains in its counter-offensive. Its stated aim to push Russia out of all Ukrainian territory. Defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford believes recapturing Crimea would guarantee their victory.
He or she who controls the Crimea or holds the Crimea basically controls the Black Sea and the entrance to the Sea of Azov. If the Ukrainians manage to take Crimea, that might be the point at which they are prepared to negotiate for peace.
In recent months, Russia has stepped up its strikes on key civilian infrastructure, heaping even more misery on Ukraine's population. Sadly, it is a grim pattern. The more military success Ukraine enjoys on the battlefield, the more its beleaguered towns and cities will suffer the effects of increased Russian bombardment. Mark White, GB News.
Hard to believe it's been 10 months, almost a year.
Yeah, I was sat here commenting on that the day it broke out. Yeah, and it's just amazing it's been going on this long.
Yeah, and what was so incredible about the Ukraine war really is nobody thought that an invasion was going to happen. We just thought Putin was kind of posturing on the border. Remarkable, really, and still going on 10 months on. So thank you to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, for that report. Now, with news of the former Pope, Pope Benedict's health being at a critical stage, we can now show you live pictures from the Vatican City.
Pope Francis has said former Pope Benedict XVI is very ill and he's asked pilgrims at the Vatican to pray for him.
At the end of the Pope's final audience of the year, he asked people to pray a special prayer for Pope Benedict.
In the latest update, the Vatican then said the ex-Pope's health had worsened. We'll bring you updates when we know more throughout the morning.
We are speaking to somebody from the Catholic Society later, I believe, who will be talking to us about Pope Benedict and giving us an update on his condition as well. That's something to watch this morning. Now, the time has just gone 6:15. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
The Labour Party wants to update Tony Blair's tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime slogan. The party will focus on the prevention of crime by tackling the effects of trauma that could lead to people being offenders. This could mean victims of antisocial behaviour potentially determine how offenders are punished.
The deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 60 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will be spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. It's issued a yellow alert for heavy rain for much of Scotland on Friday, warning of flooding and travel disruption.
A new report claims the government won't meet its target of cutting the number of smokers in the country. Cancer Research UK says 8% of people will call themselves a smoker by 2030, despite MPs' plans for England to become smoke-free by then. The charity says while progress has slowed, it could take an extra 9 years to get to that point.
Well, thank you so much for your company this morning. Do keep your views on any of the stories that we're talking about coming in to us this morning. GBViews at gbnews.uk. And we've spotted something quite fun in the papers, haven't we, Martin?
Yeah, a nice little winter warmer, page 3 of the Mirror. And it's about the great British comfort foods. What foods do you turn to when you're feeling a bit low? This time of year, there's a lot of that. So if you want to warm up, want to feel nice and wholesome and get that glow back, what do you turn to? What's your comfort food, Ali?
It's got to be a Sunday roast.
Well, in that case, you're totally in tune with the nation, as ever. Because the number one choice of 24% of Brits is precisely that roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, followed by a nice little British pudding, apple, crumble and custard, also 24%. And then a continental entrant at number 3, pizza margherita, 22%. And then it's sticky toffee pudding, garlic bread, mac cheese, spag bowl, basically the food of gods. All
the best types of food there. What about you, Martin? What's your comfort food?
Well, I've got a nice little bargain I told you about earlier, which you might think is a bit pathetic, but I'm getting a turkey today. Because today is a day when turkeys get marked down in price. I've got one on reserve over at M&S over the way.
Oh, you've had a little chat, have you? Put your name down.
Christmas turkey will be going in at Chateau d'Aubigny. Can't wait. Can't get enough turkey at Christmas.
And are you going to do the full Christmas dinner again?
Could be a bit elaborate because the kids and the missus are away. It's just for me.
Oh, just for you?
A little bit Alan Partridge.
Oh, right.
But I'm going for it.
And who's cooking it? Are you doing it all? Oh, yeah, I'm quite impressed, I think. Yeah. Well, do let us know what your favourite comfort food is. Are you doing a Martin and just recreating Christmas every day? Until how long will this go on for? Till the New Year? It's
going to go on all year because it will last a few days. I'm in here again tomorrow. I'm basically acting like a sad singleton, but I find some comfort in that.
Yeah, and you can make turkey sandwiches, turkey soup. You can do lots with that.
I'll bring you one in.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm finished now, actually. That's the end of my marathon stint. But, yeah, I'm sure somebody else would appreciate the snack.
OK, on to more serious issues. Now, one of the most controversial men on the internet, you may have heard of him, Andrew Tate, was left seeing red courtesy of Green activist Greta Thunberg after he goaded her about his collection of gas-guzzling cars. Well, our showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips joins us now. Martin's in an Ellie sandwich. It's been happening all week. But first of all, Ellie, for anyone who doesn't know, who is Andrew Tate?
OK, so Andrew Tate is a very controversial figure. He was actually born in America, in Chicago, Illinois, but then he grew up in Luton in Bedfordshire, so we have him as one of our own. In 2016, he appeared in Big Brother UK. He was actually thrown out when a video emerged of him beating up a woman with a belt and shouting abuse at her. That's when we kind of all knew, OK, this guy is, someone we need to watch out for here. He then set up something called Hustlers University, which is a website, and he made a lot of money in what was seen as a cryptocurrency scam type thing. So he's got a lot of money. Then he set himself up as essentially kind of a life coach for men, but his views are extremely controversial, very misogynistic advice about what to do if your partner cheats on you, if it's a woman, very abusive tone. He actually got banned from YouTube for life and for Instagram as well. So that's who he is, very controversial figure, but back in the day, he was a kickboxer, so former kickboxing champion as well. But we know him as this divisive figure with these extreme views. And what's happened is, yesterday, he took to Twitter to goad Greta Thunberg. And he tweeted her and said, I've got these 33 cars, they're gas guzzlers. Let me know if you want to know more about it. She swiftly responded in what is now being called one of the greatest Twitter takedowns of the year, even though it's nearly the end of the year. And she basically said to him, I would love to know more. Please email me the information. She took aim at his manhood, but the email address she gave him, which was to do with his manhood, it's smallbleepenergy@getalife.com. Can't say the middle word. You can use your imagination on that one. But people applaud. It's a little bit early, but people applauded her straight away, and they're like, what a takedown. This is amazing. He tried to come back and tweeted her and said, how dare you, which was a take on her infamous emotional UN speech when she broke down in 2019. But then he wasn't able to let it go because it was going viral. People were saying this is such a good takedown of you. And so 10 hours later, he then tweeted a video of himself in a red robe, basically trying to break down her tweet and saying, why are you telling me about the size of your manhood? And people were like, this is just really odd. It's taken you 10 hours to do this. Get over it.
It's interesting because, like, as the sort of bloke on the panel, I used to do a lot of stuff around men's issues, and a lot of men are looking for a kind of father figure or a mentor or some sense of belonging. This guy, I think, has quite cynically filled that space. His cars, his muscles, his tattoos are all part of this alpha male energy. But it's got to say, game, set and match to Greta.
Honestly.
I think she absolutely kicked his bum.
And I think you're totally right that he was just too slow on the comeback. It was like, oh, is that the best you've got?
It's like you tried it once. You tried it again 10 hours later, and that's the best you could come on with. People were like, just let it go, mate.
You know when you had a row with someone and you're like in the shower and you're like, oh, I should have come up with that comeback. And I can imagine that was Andrew Tate yesterday. And he was like, oh, I need to go back and try
stewing
again.
over it for 10 hours, seething that he's been taken down by this teenage eco-activist. But I think she's brilliant.
He's got like 4 million. He's got millions and millions of followers. But, at that first instance, he completely lost. And the sound you could hear was just of him digging deeper and deeper into a hole. He got himself
absolutely 1-0 to Greta Thunberg.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Sugar Babes, shall we? There's a story about that 90s band. Is it 90s?
90s, yeah. They formed originally in 1998, the Sugar Babes, back in the day, with their 3 original members, Mutia, Keisha and Siobhan. Incredibly talented band. They had...
Forgot Siobhan.
Yeah, they had different members over the year. And eventually, all 3 had been replaced by other people, like Heidi Range, people like that. But in 2011, they reformed. So they've actually been back together since 2011. But what's happened in the past couple of weeks is that they released an album 4 days ago called The Lost Tapes, which was actually written by them 8 years ago, but they couldn't release for various legal reasons because they actually only regained the use of the term Sugar Babes as their name in 2019, big legal battles over it. So they independently released that 4 days ago. They've announced this big tour next year, and now record labels are fighting over them.
Is it any good?
It's brilliant. It's iconic Sugar Babes music. It's R&B. It's cool. It's sexy. It's edgy. And I think the difference is, and this is what reports are saying about why record labels want to sign them, is because they could do new music. They might be nostalgic, but they're not cheesy nostalgia. They're not steps. The Sugar Babes are cool. They're edgy. They're incredibly talented. I've seen them live a number of times. Their voices are amazing. So yeah, this is really exciting for them. Massive comeback turnaround.
Yeah, a whole new comeback for the Sugar Babes.
Very well,
yeah,
Ellie.
very good, Ellie. She's a bit of a fan over there, I think.
A little bit.
Ellie, thanks so much. Brilliant. Now, after the break, we're looking back at Boris Johnson's 2022.
And we're back in just a moment. Please stay where you are.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, you're here with Breakfast on GB News with me, Ellie Costello.
And me, Martin Dorby. So still to come on today's programme. Well, it was a premiership to remember. The UK left the European Union. He led the UK through a pandemic and he led the way through the Ukraine, supporting them over there following Russia's invasion. But 2022 proved to be the year where Boris Johnson was forced out of office. And we'll be looking into the rise and the fall of the former Prime Minister.
And 2022 will be the UK's warmest year on record, with the Met Office saying the figures show the climate crisis is having a real impact. We'll be looking into this as well.
And as ever, we want to hear from you, the viewer. Get in touch in all the usual ways. GB Views at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GB News. So tell us, do you miss Boris? Is it weather or is it global warming? Get in touch.
Or is it your favourite comfort? Your favourite comfort food is what I was saying there, because we're talking about that as well, aren't we, today?
Yeah.
What was the number one thing? Roast beef.
Yorkshire pudding, yeah.
Is Britain's favourite comfort food, and also mine, although roast chicken would be my favourite roast.
That's number 17 on the list.
Well, I'm not quite in touch with the nation then, am I? There you go. Well, let's talk about Boris Johnson now, shall we? Love him or loathe him, Boris Johnson is a huge personality who presided over our country during a global pandemic and a war in Europe. But in 2022, Conservative MPs decided he'd become an electoral liability, and they got rid of him.
Yet, in a new poll of Conservative members, he remains more popular than current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, takes a look back over Boris Johnson's 2022.
Just 2 years earlier, Johnson had won an 80-seat majority on his promise to get Brexit done. But 2022 began badly. The latest Partygate revelation was the most shocking yet. Number 10 staff had partied with suitcases of wine the night before the Queen sat alone at Prince Philip's funeral. The Prime Minister apologised to Her Majesty for the behaviour of his staff. Tory grandee David Davis was scathing.
You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Partygate took a back seat when Russia invaded Ukraine in February, and Johnson led the West's response in offering strong support to Volodymyr Zelensky.
How are you?
In Ukraine, the beleaguered British Prime Minister became a hero. Back home, in April, he was fined by police for breaking lockdown rules by attending a brief birthday gathering in June 2020.
Today, I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police. Let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology.
In May, Sue Gray's long-awaited report into lockdown gatherings was finally published. It was damning. The Conservatives did terribly in local elections and lost by-elections both to Labour and the Lib Dems. Many Tory MPs had had enough. A confidence vote followed on the 6th of June.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
An uneasy truce ensued until Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher was suspended for sexual misconduct, and Downing Street's ever-changing recollections of what Johnson had known and when became too much for MPs to bear. Health Secretary Sajid Javid resigned first, followed minutes later by Chancellor Rishi Sunak. The following day, ministers resigned faster than Johnson could replace them. On July the 7th, he admitted defeat.
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
He channeled Arnold Schwarzenegger in his final PMQs.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Come September, he met the Queen and in his final speech obliquely hinted at a possible return.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
Cincinnatus was a Roman general who returned to office in his country's hour of need. Later, Liz Truss's premiership had imploded and the Conservative Party needed another leader fast. It couldn't be Johnson, could it? As the calls to bring back Boris grew, he raced back from his Caribbean holiday and hit the phones. He and the favourite Sunak met, but on the Sunday night, Johnson announced it was not the right time and withdrew. Since then, he's joined rebellions on onshore wind and says he will fight the next election. Johnson has made over £1 million for just 4 speeches. Analysts say he could make £5 million a year. Some comfort, perhaps, for the man who wanted to be world king. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Well, it's amazing to think that Boris has gone. I mean, I know that GB News viewers are, a lot of you miss the guy. It'd be great to hear what you think. You know, get in touch, send us your views. And we were saying in the break, well, I mean, I'm no Conservative. In fact, I stood against Boris in a couple of elections, but I absolutely understand why people like the guy. He's a winner, and it sounds like, you know, he's going to come back.
Well, I've spent a lot of time in Tory constituencies, obviously for my job, and that is the number one thing that most people say to me, is they miss Boris Johnson. I was up in a Red Wall seat a few weeks ago, and they were saying, look, that's who they voted for. I know that's not the way that it works here in the United Kingdom, but it was Boris that secured that vote for them in 2019.
And a People's poll we did for GB News last week put Boris way in front as the favourite of the Prime Ministers, and he certainly, I think, would like him back.
Yeah, well, let us know what you think. Would you like to see a Boris come back? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Is it possible? And if you think he could come back, when do you think that could be? Could it be 2024, or could he be leader of the opposition? Let us know what you think. Get your crystal balls out. Let us know what you think. Now, coming up, we're going to have a look at the front pages and the top headlines from today's newspapers with Norman Baker and Sophia Corcoran.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Good morning and thank you for choosing us to spend your morning with. The time has just gone 6:35. Let's bring you up to date with today's front pages, shall we?
And the Express leads on Rishi Sunak committing to make the nation's streets and homes safe for everyone following a spate of Christmas violence.
The Mail asks if the Tories have given up on cutting tax after Chancellor Jeremy Hunt reportedly axes a Treasury review system.
The Telegraph says taxpayer cash has been handed to groups promoting Islamist extremism.
The Guardian focuses on families affected by dementia, warning of a national crisis in care safety.
And The Sun reports civil servants have been handed £30 million in gifts, cards for shops and restaurants including Primark and Nando's.
Well, it's time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker and political commentator Sophie Corcoran. Good morning to you, Norman and Sophie. Thank you for joining us. Norman, let's start with you, shall we? And Tories tax in the Mail.
Yes, well, this is really the Daily Mail pushing its agenda, I think, because the Treasury review of the tax system, which was introduced or begun by Kwasi Kwarteng, remember him? He was Chancellor for a short period of time, has been ditched by Jeremy Hunt, and many would think that's probably a logical consequence of the change of regime, which has been at number 10 and number 11 after the disastrous short period of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, which cost us, I think, £33 billion as a country in those short weeks. So I think the Mail's reading too much into this. The only person who got commenting on it is John Redwood, who, with the greatest respect, is something of a Tory dinosaur. So this is the Mail's own opinion, and in fact they have a leader column which says how terrible it is that the review's been cancelled. But we know what happened with Kwasi Kwarteng. All the markets lost confidence. The thing went into meltdown. The Tory MPs were all panicking about it. So, you know, the Mail wants to seem to return to those days. It isn't going to happen, and Jeremy Hunt, I think, is probably seen by most people as a safe pair of hands. I've no doubt that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister want to cut tax if they can. I think they're genuine about that. And I suspect, with the electoral cycle the way it is, there may be some tax cutting just before the next general election.
Well, no doubt, Sophie, your political heroine, Maggie Thatcher, you're very open about that. Do you think it's fair to say that we voted for Boris, we voted for the Tories, but we've ended up with a tax system that feels like Corbynism?
Yeah, and the most fundamental part of being a Conservative is to be low tax, because you want people to be able to keep more of their money in their paychecks at the end of the month. And not only do I feel like this government has given up on cutting taxes, I feel like they've also given up on being Conservative. And that is through a multiple range of realms, whether that is, you know, their stances on immigration. They have failed consistently to deal with that, the taxes agenda. And I don't feel like a lot of the financial problems that we have now come from a position of a lack of tax. I mean, we've got the highest tax burden we ever had in about 70 years. The problem we have is overspending. And Rishi Sunak has an overspending addiction. I think it is morally wrong to refuse to cut taxes when we're sending 11.6 billion to Pakistan and other countries for climate change. We're spending billions to Ukraine. We're spending millions on our migrant hotels. I mean, I think it's rather bold for them to then go back to the British taxpayer and say, you now have to fit the bill. And I think it's frankly unconservative. So I do agree with where the Mail's coming from. And I don't trust Jeremy Hunt or Rishi Sunak to cut those taxes. I feel like he had very little ambition to do so in the leadership contest, which is why I voted for Liz Truss, and I still don't see that ambition now. I mean, it could change, and I hope it changes, but I doubt it.
What do you think then about bills that have to be paid? So that's one of the things that Rishi Sunak did say, didn't he, in that initial speech on the steps of Downing Street, that there are massive bills to pay, an astronomical one from COVID lockdowns. He said he doesn't want to pass it on to the next generation, to his children, and this is simply a case of balancing the books. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, funnily enough, the position we are in, with the debt that we are in, was also responsible, the person responsible for that was Rishi Sunak. And I think that we have to take that into account in his prime ministership. We cannot allow this man to have any excuses, because he is the reason that we are in this position in the first place. I mean, I'm 20, so a lot of these burdens, these tax burdens, will fall on my generation and the generation below me. So, of course, being Conservative is about not maxing out the country's credit card, but he is saying that whilst doing the opposite at the same time, consistently going to these abroad summits and committing to spending large sums of money for things that do not benefit the British people and the British taxpayer. So I can't get on board with that excuse until he starts putting his money where his mouth is and stop spending so ludicrously. Then I will accept more tax, but until that happens, I won't.
Well, we've got two guests both putting the boot into the same government. They're from different angles, and that's what's great about this paper review. Can we stick with you now, Sophie? Another one of yours here. Put the boot into Rishi again. He's pledging, we covered it earlier in the show, to make Britain's streets safer, but there's no detail.
No, there is very little detail, and every single time I see these headlines, I instinctively roll my eyes, because that's what a Prime Minister should be doing. That is a job of a Prime Minister. A job of a government is to look after their citizens and make sure that they are safe. So I'm not going to sit here, and neither should the public sit here and be grateful that he's tackling crime or saying he's going to tackle crime. That's what he should be doing. What does he want, a medal for doing his job? There's very little detail in this case, and as I've said before, the government have promised a lot and have delivered very little, so I'm looking to see actions rather than words here.
OK, Norman, as a former minister yourself...
Yes, former Home Office Minister.
Yeah, so where we are today, we do have a problem with violent crime, particularly
we do.
Crime. What would you do about it if you were in power now?
We do. Well, there is an issue about why people feel dispossessed, and the education system is clearly failing in some regards. It's also the case that there's not sufficient diversionary tactics. When I was a crime prevention minister, I made sure that young people had alternatives to go to, so they didn't stand on street corners. So that's where you start it. There's also an issue about how many police you got on the beat, because that is a deterrent effect. But, you know, I'll tell you what's not a deterrent effect, this is Home Office research, is increasing sentences. Because what deters people is the risk of being caught, not how long the sentence is if they are caught. So ratcheting up sentences is you know, it makes good headlines. It doesn't actually achieve anything. Of course, the stories in Daily Express, which always finds a reason to promote the Prime Minister and his colleagues, irrespective of what else is happening in the world. It's also an outlier. So you have to take that with a pinch of salt. But look, I mean, the streets aren't as safe as they should be. And I think that needs proper investment. And it needs investment right from the beginning, from the education system. It really does.
So you're saying this should be a holistic approach? I mean, it should be across the board, prison reform, police officers?
Yes, totally. I mean, look, the idea, the knee-jerk things which appear to be popular is, one, increase sentences, and two, you know, make prison harsh. Those two things don't actually cut crime. They may make people feel better, but they don't cut crime. So we have to go back to basics and see what does cut crime.
The trouble with those sort of approaches, though, Norman, I know you're right, but they take a long time. They cost a packet, and people want to see instant results, don't they? They do. People want a quick fix, and you know, Rishi is talking about arming the police. Now, again, as a former
They don't
minister,
want armed. The police do not want armed, because if the police are armed, then the criminals get armed in return. The police have been very solid over many, many decades. They don't want an American situation where there's guns everywhere. I think they're quite right on that. And as far as quick fix solutions are concerned, you're right. Do you remember Tony Blair going to take people along gunpoint, effectively, to a cash point machine? You know, what happened to that?
But what about if they already are armed, though? We consistently have this conversation, and I'm really passionate about enabling women to have pepper spray. And the first thing people say is, well, that means the criminals can get hold of it. Well, they already have it. And there comes to a point of, if you are a victim of a crime, your first thing isn't, I need to call the police. The next thought isn't, I need to get justice. The first thing is, how do I keep myself alive? Yes. And there comes a point where we need a quick fix, because this is people's lives. There are so many people dying on the streets. There are so many people getting hurt because of these failures of reform. And we need to create a way where people are able, when they become a victim of crime, not after when they're dead and it's too late, to actually protect themselves. And I think that's a part of the bill and the conversation that we always routinely miss, because these people are already armed. They're
Sophie,
already committing crimes.
I think that's right. I mean, women must be able to protect themselves on the street. And you know, speaking as a father of a 22-year-old daughter, I worry about what she's doing on the street, or what's happening to her on the streets. So that's a different thing, however, from the police being armed, which escalates matters unnecessarily and is unhelpful. But I'm very strong in favour of women and girls in particular being able to defend themselves.
Norma, let's take a look at the strikes, shall we? Because, as we said earlier, there's a fair few of them going on this week. The Times is forecasting it's only a matter of time before they synchronise.
And we already got synchronised, right?
Well, we have, and it's a very thin story in the Times, I might say, and a much better story reporting it in the Eye on page 6 when it goes into more detail. I mean, I don't think it really helps the unions or makes any big impact to coordinate strikes. I mean, if the postman's out at the same time as the rail workers, how does that send any message apart from... Actually, it's probably unhelpful to the unions because they're probably more effective having a drip of strikes over a series of days, if that's their intention, rather than having all big bang and then having no strikes for a while. So I think actually it's a non-story. What is interesting, however, is that they are, and this is reported in the Eye, that the new leader of the TUC, who appears to be rather more radical than his predecessor...
Nowak.
Yes. His predecessor was, I think, regarded as mainstream. He's suggesting that they may walk away from these independent pay review bodies on the basis that they don't work. And the statistic in the Eye here is that, well, the TUC claims that UK workers have lost on average £20,000 in real wages since 2008, when the global financial crisis. If that's the case, then independent pay review bodies probably aren't working.
I wonder if, Sophie, strikes are just becoming a bit like COVID. We're just learning to live with them. We're working around them, and are they ceasing to be effective? Because it's like wherever you go, there's a fresh strike. Well, we just get on with life, don't we? Are they ceasing to be effective, and are the public just totally losing sympathy?
No, and not only are the public losing sympathy, a lot of the employees are starting to lose sympathy as well. A lot of them don't want to go on strike. And one thing, I really feel like striking disproportionately impacts working class people a lot more than anybody else, because if the nurses go on strike, the people who are paying for private healthcare, they don't really care. The people who can pay for speedy delivery when the postal workers go on strike, they don't really care. The people that can afford to get taxis into work every day, these people don't care. But the working class people that rely on the basic Royal Mail delivery to get their stuff for Christmas, to get the trains and things to work, or who have to use NHS and have already been waiting for years to get the treatment that they need, these are the people that are really impacted. So I don't really buy the argument that they're helping working class.
And interestingly as well, Mr Nowak is on about 160 grand a year, typical big fat union salary, and the union workers, as you mentioned, Norman, they're losing a lot of money now by walking out.
They are indeed losing money, and £160,000 a year, I suppose, is less than a lot of other people get, but nevertheless it's a big paycheck and many people welcome that themselves, a lot more than I get, I might say. So yes, but I mean, this is a situation where strikes will carry on, and you're absolutely right, Martin, that people are learning to live with it. I mean, the fact is that rail travel, for example, is now, this is post-COVID, is now not required to be undertaken as it was in commuter days. People choose when they're going to work. And if the trains aren't running on a Tuesday, well, they don't go to work on a Tuesday, stay home and work from home. That's now become established. If you look at the pattern of rail use, you will see that leisure travel has increased dramatically, actually, since COVID, and commuter travel is well down. Equally, if the Royal Mail doesn't turn up on a Tuesday, well, so what? I mean, it'll turn up on a Wednesday. So I think people don't really care about that. What they do care about, probably in terms of strikes, is worrying that the health service won't be as effective.
Cool, we need to jog on now. Sophie, something I know which gets your chattels raised up. Wokery at the BBC.
Yep, so a bunch of leading professors from some of our top universities have accused the BBC of being biased towards their perception and distortion of history. One of them even accused them of having a fatwa against Winston Churchill. I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to many of our GB News viewers, and there's actually the reason this station actually exists is because we cannot trust the BBC to hold our nation in a positive light. They are consistently looking to drag down this nation, whether it's our history, whether it's our current affairs, whatever's going on. And a lot of the young producers in there are political activists. And I think, you know, when Cambridge professors, who are a very, very woke institution, let's be honest, come out and say you're distorting history and you're trying to make it something as it's not to become woke, I think, you know, that shows you the real extent of the issue.
Norman?
Well, I don't think the BBC is trying to drag down the nation. I think what it's doing is presenting a view which many people don't like and feel is biased. That's what they're doing. Equally, you could say that people no doubt say that we're biased on GB News. So you'll always find a group of people who disagree with the line that's being taken by any particular channel. The BBC and GB News and every other TV and radio outlet is required by law to be neutral, to be balanced. That's what they're required to be. And if they're not balanced, they can be subject to complaints at Ofcom. Ofcom can find against them, and in extremity, they can have their right to broadcast taken away, as happened with RT Russia Today, and happened with the Iranian one, Press TV. They had their licence to broadcast taken away. So that's the safeguard. And I might say that, of course, the BBC's got faults, but you know, the BBC needs to exist. It needs to exist for this country. We'd be lots poorer without it. If you look at the American system, where you've got openly biased broadcasters like Fox TV, who don't pretend to be...
CNN.
And CNN, if you like, don't pretend to be balanced. You know, thank God we've got in this country, you know, for all their faults, the BBC, us, ITV, Channel 4, you've got a nice mixture of people who are all committed by law to balance. If they get it wrong, they can be hauled over the coals for it.
I should just say at this point that the BBC says they're an impartial state broadcaster. They're funded by taxpayers' money, and they are satisfied that the coverage is for the great British public. So that's quite important.
And on GB News, we have a liberal heavyweight and we have a young Maggie. So we've got perfect balance here.
Yeah, and the good thing, and the nice thing about GB News is that all voices can be heard. You know, People's Channel, and we're all for debate and doing it in a polite way as well, which is a great thing about this channel. Norman, I think we have time. Do we have time? Yes, we have time. We'll do a quick word on dementia patients, shall we, in care homes. It's in The Guardian.
This is awful, actually, this story, that 1 in 11 care homes is well below standard, and the other 39% of the half, if you like, are needing improvement. And the Care Commission, which reports on these matters independently, has found residence dressings unchanged for 20 days, revolting, that's their word, filthy carpets, unexplained and unwitnessed wounds, equipment encrusted with dirt. I mean, these are shocking findings from the Care Commission. And what's the reason for this? Well, again, according to the Chief Executive of Care England, he says that the staff shortages and council funding for 24-hour care places is as little as £4 per hour.
I think social care is a huge health time bomb. I don't think any political party seems to have an answer, Sophie. I mean, this is coming down the line. It's something that we really have to get to grip with. It's going to be really expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be massively expensive. I mean, we obviously try to see implementations happen in the social care reforms that have just passed, but this problem is so deep-rooted that it's going to be one that I think is really, really difficult to solve, and it's only going to become more difficult because the populations are ageing and living longer. So there is a large amount of people in their 60s and the 70s who are eventually all going to get old, and that is going to cost my generation an enormous amount. But I feel like it just saddens me so much when we see the arguments over the triple lock pension, and we see the way people are treated in care homes, that people who have given so much to their life for this country are ending their lives in such a way. I feel like we really need to try and make sure that people can leave this world with dignity, with pride, and really, you know, live the best lives that they can in the last years after working so hard. And I think it is a priority for the government. It should be. That
was an excellent smorgasbord of common sense for breakfast from Norman and Sophie. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next hour. Thank you very much.
Now, time has just gone 6:53. Let's bring you up to date with the other stories making the headlines today.
The government says there are no plans to introduce mandatory corona tests for visitors from China. This comes after China reportedly is experiencing an influx of cases since COVID restrictions have been eased. Other countries like the USA have now imposed new measures for travellers from China after accusing them of a lack of information transparency.
A woman has been arrested on suspicion of neglect over 8-year-old's death linked to Strep A in Wales. That's according to the BBC. The 33-year-old was taken into custody on the 23rd of December, but has been released as inquiries continue. The UK Health Security Agency data shows 21 children under 18 in England have died from the infections, while 3 deaths of children have been recorded in Belfast and Wales.
And Pope Francis has asked for prayers for his predecessor, former Pope Benedict, saying he's very sick. The Vatican says the 95-year-old had a sudden worsening of his health, but is receiving constant medical care. The former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope in 600 years to resign when he stepped down in 2013.
2022 will be the UK's warmest year on record, as the Met Office says figures show the climate crisis is having a real impact.
The Met Office said the annual average temperatures across the UK this year would exceed the previous record set in 2014.
Well, we're joined now by our South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody, for more. Good morning to you, Jeff. Tell us a bit more about this.
Good morning. Well, it's a bit ironic talking about it today of all days. It's freezing down here in Exeter. I'm outside the Met Office where right now, when they get up, they are crossing the T's and dotting the I's on their report, which should come out on New Year's Day, revealing that, shock horror, this has been the hottest year on record. When did those records begin? Well, the Met Office has been recording temperatures since 1884, so it stretches back a long way. But actually, there has been a recording of temperatures in England known as the Central England temperature, and that's been going strong since 1659. So this is a very long period of time, and it's been the hottest year. We don't need anyone to tell us that. We lived through it. We saw temperatures getting up to 40 degrees and above in places in the summer. We reported lots on reservoirs that are running low and the drought and the hosepipe bans that followed. No sign of a hosepipe ban now, of course, as it's pouring down with rain. But of course, is this just weather or is this climate change? Well, the Met Office is pointing us in one direction, see if you can work out which one it is, by saying that over the last 20 years, 10 of the top 10 hottest years have occurred since 2002 in the last 20 years. Top 10 in the last 20 years. So they're saying very clearly that this is down to climate change and we should be getting used to this. The National Trust has got involved as well. They're saying that it's very much a case of climate change and it's very much a case of the new normal. We should expect much hotter summers, much wetter winters, storms as well in places, and they're saying that gardeners in particular need to adjust the way they garden. You can now plant things at different times of year compared to what the books tell you to. It's all to play for, really. We don't know what this next year is going to be like, because the Met Office is also keen to stress that this isn't going to happen every year. It doesn't necessarily follow that because last year was extremely hot, next year will be extremely hot as well. It could in fact be very cool next year, but still they're saying it's all down to climate change.
Jeff Moody in Exeter, thank you very, very much. And it wasn't lost on us, was it, the irony of talking about the warmest year on record, stood in a very, very cold-looking Exeter. Go get warm, Jeff, go get a tea or something. Well, do let us know what you think of that story, GBNews at gbnews.uk. You are watching Breakfast on GB News. Still lots to come on today's programme, including the British government has said it will not introduce testing for arrivals from China. That's despite an explosion of COVID infections in the country following the axing of its strict measures.
And there's much more on that after the break. Please stay with us.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
The British government has said it has no plans to introduce travel restrictions on visitors from China as COVID rapidly spreads throughout the country.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of December. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and myself, Martin Daubney. And here's what's leading the news this morning.
The UK will not reintroduce mandatory COVID tests for anyone arriving from China. That's despite the USA announcing that from the 5th of January, all Chinese arrivals will need to provide a negative COVID test before takeoff. It comes as UK Border Force staff begin the second day in a series of strikes at UK airports until New Year's Eve.
And Pope Francis has said the former Pope, Benedict XVI, is very ill and he's asked pilgrims at the Vatican to pray for him. Benedict became the first leader of the Catholic Church to stand down in 600 years in 2013, citing advanced age.
And 2022 will be the warmest year on record for the United Kingdom. Aside from the summer peak, the Met Office said all 4 seasons in Britain this year were in the top 10 warmest since records began in 1884.
So get in touch all the usual ways via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews and let us know where you're watching so we give you a shout. Let us know about Boris, about comfort food, about the COVID restrictions and about strikes. Anything you want to offload, send it our way.
To our top story, and the US has announced that all travellers from China must provide a negative COVID-19 test to enter the country, joining other nations imposing restrictions because of a surge of infections in China. However, the UK government has said it is not planning to follow suit.
The increase in cases across China follows the rollback of the nation's strict antivirus controls. Beijing's zero COVID policies had kept the country's infection rate low, but fueled public frustration and crushed the country's economic growth. Well, joining us now in the studio is political commentator Albi Amankona. So can we talk initially about the COVID restrictions? So the USA making mandatory tests for entry from China. Italy doing the same after 50% of passengers on 2 flights at Milan were testing positive. The UK, however, isn't. Is that too lax, or is it just keep calm and carry on?
I think it's the right approach from the UK government. A keep calm and carry on attitude is exactly what we need. You know, we've built up some amazing COVID defence in this country. We had a brilliant vaccine rollout. We've got the majority of the population vaccinated. We also have some amazing clinical methods to actually treat COVID-19. So if you do catch COVID and go into hospital, you're very unlikely to die or even get seriously ill. It's time to get back to normal. That means having open borders, and that means not testing people upon arrival.
I mean, lots of people will be watching and listening and agreeing with you, but some will be concerned, saying, look, this isn't about us. Many of us are vaccinated. This is about them. When we look at China, it's a largely rural population, largely unvaccinated. There is going to be concern that if there are going to be new variants that we don't know about, potentially China is where they would come from. That's what people are worried about. And do you think that's a reasonable thing to be concerned about?
I can completely understand the concerns that people have, but for the reasons that I mentioned before, this country is very well protected against COVID outbreaks, whether or not that is from a new variant or whether or not those are from variants that we already know about. We've got some amazing vaccines in this country, medical methods to treat people from COVID-19. I can understand why people are concerned, but this government has done a very good job at protecting this country against COVID-19, so we don't need to be worried about new infections.
Something else of concern to the nation, of course, are the ongoing strikes. A new character is emerging today, Paul Nowak. Sounds like Paul No Way. By the way he's carrying on, he's saying it's only a matter of time in today's papers that we have coordinated strikes in the UK. This guy's threatened to walk out of talks in the new year before he's even in his job. This guy sounds like a nightmare for Rishi Sunak. What's Rishi going to do to unlock this country from strikes?
Well, first of all, it already feels like we're having coordinated strike action in this country. We're seeing strike action across a number of different public sector workers, whether or not we're talking about border force staff or nurses or train drivers and so on and so forth. Look, Rishi Sunak is going to have a difficult time this year with TUC bosses, the incoming TUC boss, Paul Nowak, who's not even started his job yet and is already threatening to walk out.
Is it time for Rishi to blink first and just pay up and get the country open again?
No, absolutely not, because as soon as Rishi blinks, all of the union bosses will want inflation-busting pay rises, and that is just not something which the country can afford. What needs to happen is government and trade union bosses need to get around the table and come up with a compromised pay settlement. It's not going to be inflation-busting, but it can probably be more than the government is currently offering.
He has been accused, though, Rishi Sunak, of a lack of leadership, not attending Cobra meetings when it comes to strikes. Should he be getting involved? Should he be putting a stop to this?
Look, it is up to the employers and the trade union bosses to come up with a pay settlement, and obviously the government sets the parameters of that. I think all parties need to work better together to come up with some sort of pay settlement which is going to satisfy the unions, but which isn't going to bankrupt the nation.
Another thing on the front page today, The Express, is Rishi promising to get tough on crime. You know, as a Conservative activist yourself, law and order is a key issue on the doorstep. He's threatening to get tougher. What kind of measures would you like to see? They're talking in the papers today about arming the police. Should Britain go the route of America and give coppers guns?
No, I wouldn't be in favour of Britain going the route of America and arming coppers. I mean, if we look at the crime rate in the United Kingdom versus the crime rate in the United States, where they have armed coppers, the crime rate is lower in the United Kingdom. What we need to be focusing on are actual methods to cut crime, rather than shiny things that sound good, like arming police officers,
what kind of things
but don't actually necessarily deliver. So in terms of things that Rishi should consider, we already know that the government is almost already at its target of hiring 20,000 police officers by 2023. So that is obviously going to go some way to solving crime in this country, but also looking at unblocking the backlogs that we see in the court system, investing more in our prison system, and also a proper crime prevention strategy, so we're not just tackling the symptoms of a problem, we're actually tackling things at the root cause as well.
Does it need to be a more localised approach as well? I mean, the scenes that we've seen in Merseyside, Elle Edwards shot in a pub on Christmas Eve. 4 months ago, we had Olivia Pratt-Corbell, a 9-year-old little girl, shot in her own home. I mean, there'll be questions, especially if you're watching listening in Merseyside, about what needs to be done locally to tackle what is, it looks like, a huge gun issue in that part of the country.
We do hear a lot about better community policing initiatives and actually decentralising policing a little bit more, so it is actually more controlled locally rather than at a national level. I think that's very important, but I think actually when we give power to localities, we often see better results, devolution and so on and so forth, and I think that's probably a trend that we will continue to see in policing, but it is absolutely something which this government needs to get a control of. It is a core Conservative value to be tough on crime.
Can I ask you, as a man of colour, stop and search is something that comes up. It's consistently derided as racist, although it wasn't when it was deployed in Glasgow very effectively, or in Merseyside very effectively to cut knife crime. Is more stop and search something that Rishi should be pursuing also?
Look, stop and search where it works should be employed, and it should not be employed where it doesn't work. We've got to be focusing on what is effective. Of course, there are sensitivities around stop and search, particularly for Black Britons. We do see a disproportionate number of Black Britons stopped and searched compared to other ethnic minority groups.
But it's still an effective tool to deploy where needed.
Where needed, it can be a very effective tool if it's done properly and legally. The problems arise where it's not done properly or legally. So we've got to be focusing on what is effective and making sure that the police are working within the confines of the law.
So there's been a load of feedback this morning from GB News viewers about they want Boris Johnson back. I mean, we got comments coming out of our ears. Would you like to see Boris return to the Tory fore?
It is not an option at the moment. We have a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who was appointed Prime Minister just earlier on this year. We had a Prime Minister before that, Liz Truss, who lasted only 45 days. And then, of course, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister before that. Do we really want another leadership election in this country in 2023? I would say no. I'd like a calmer political year so we can focus more on policies, getting inflation down and delivering for the British people, rather than internal fights within the Conservative Party.
Spoken like a true politician. Albie, I think you have a bright future in politics. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Tremendous.
Thank you, Albie.
Cheers. OK, well, Russian leader Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals if Ukraine continues to make gains in its successful counter-offensive. That's according to the former head of the British Army. Speaking exclusively to GB News, General Lord Richard Dannett says strategic losses and rapidly falling morale could open the real possibility of Putin's enforced removal.
But Lord Dannett told our Home and Security editor Mark White that it was vital that the US, UK and other allies continue to stay the course in supplying Ukraine with state-of-the-art Western weapon systems.
For the better part of a year, Ukraine has been under relentless Russian bombardment. From missile strikes to tank and artillery fire, as Russian forces push to consolidate their gains. But in recent months, against seemingly insurmountable odds, the Ukrainians have been pushing back. A counter-offensive making key gains. Chief among them, recapturing the strategically important southern city of Kherson. The former head of the British Army believes if Ukraine can keep up that momentum in the months ahead, then the Russian president could find it increasingly difficult to cling on to power.
I could see a set of circumstances where the Russian military's morale would collapse. When you've lost the will to win, when you've decided that you're defeated in your own head, then you will lose. And of course, if that was to happen, that's a game changer. I think we would see a change of regime in the Kremlin. I think we would see Putin out.
There's no doubting the bravery and resolve of the Ukrainians, but it's sophisticated Western-supplied weapon systems that's helped give them the edge in many of their encounters with Russian forces. Lord Dannett says it's absolutely vital that the US in particular stands firm in its support of Ukraine.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
Also key is the continuation of the training of Ukrainian volunteers, particularly by Britain and Poland.
Yeah, so I'm going to place the TMH at the front. I'm going to ensure that the pins, are pulled out as we previously did, yeah?
Around 10,000 Ukrainians are being trained in the UK before returning home to take up the fight. In the months ahead, Ukraine has to keep up the momentum and continue making gains in its counter-offensive. Its stated aim to push Russia out of all Ukrainian territory. Defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford believes recapturing Crimea would guarantee their victory.
He or she who controls the Crimea or holds the Crimea basically controls the Black Sea and the entrance to the Sea of Azov. If the Ukrainians manage to take Crimea, that might be the point at which they are prepared to negotiate for peace.
In recent months, Russia has stepped up its strikes on key civilian infrastructure, heaping even more misery on Ukraine's population. Sadly, it is a grim pattern. The more military success Ukraine enjoys on the battlefield, the more its beleaguered towns and cities will suffer the effects of increased Russian bombardment. Mark White, GB News.
Now, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson presided over our country during a global pandemic and a war in Europe. But earlier this year, Conservative MPs decided he'd become an electoral liability, and he was replaced with Liz Truss. Remember her?
Yet, in a new poll of Conservative members, Boris remains more popular than ever, and certainly more than the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, takes a look back over Boris Johnson's fateful 2022.
Just 2 years earlier, Johnson had won an 80-seat majority on his promise to get Brexit done. But 2022 began badly. The latest Partygate revelation was the most shocking yet. Number 10 staff had partied with suitcases of wine the night before the Queen sat alone at Prince Philip's funeral. The Prime Minister apologised to Her Majesty for the behaviour of his staff. Tory grandee David Davis was scathing.
You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Partygate took a back seat when Russia invaded Ukraine in February, and Johnson led the West's response in offering strong support to Volodymyr Zelensky.
How are you?
In Ukraine, the beleaguered British Prime Minister became a hero. Back home, in April, he was fined by police for breaking lockdown rules by attending a brief birthday gathering in June 2020.
Today, I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police. Let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology.
In May, Sue Gray's long-awaited report into lockdown gatherings was finally published. It was damning. The Conservatives did terribly in local elections and lost by-elections both to Labour and the Lib Dems. Many Tory MPs had had enough. A confidence vote followed on the 6th of June.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
An uneasy truce ensued until Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher was suspended for sexual misconduct, and Downing Street's ever-changing recollections of what Johnson had known and when became too much for MPs to bear. Health Secretary Sajid Javid resigned first, followed minutes later by Chancellor Rishi Sunak. The following day, ministers resigned faster than Johnson could replace them. On July the 7th, he admitted defeat.
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
He channeled Arnold Schwarzenegger in his final PMQs.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Come September, he met the Queen and in his final speech obliquely hinted at a possible return.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
Cincinnatus was a Roman general who returned to office in his country's hour of need. Later, Liz Truss's premiership had imploded, and the Conservative Party needed another leader fast. It couldn't be Johnson, could it? As the calls to bring back Boris grew, he raced back from his Caribbean holiday and hit the phones. He and the favourite Sunak met, but on the Sunday night, Johnson announced it was not the right time and withdrew. Since then, he's joined rebellions on onshore wind and says he will fight the next election. Johnson has made over £1 million for just 4 speeches. Analysts say he could make $5 million a year. Some comfort, perhaps, for the man who wanted to be world king. Catherine Forster, GB News.
So, Catherine, they're reflecting on a very dramatic 2022 for Boris Johnson and potentially looking ahead to a comeback. That's got lots of you talking on GBNews this morning. Do get in touch with your thoughts on that. Would you like to see a Boris comeback, bring Boris back? That was trending, wasn't it, just a few months ago? GBNews at gbnews.uk. Lots of you been in touch. Jean has been in touch saying, we voted for Boris. We have not voted for Rishi and Hunt, nor will we. The Tory party remains
Remainers lost our votes when they plotted and schemed to push Boris out. Tories are finished without Boris.
That's an astonishing ratio. When you look down the comments coming in from you, the viewers, it's about 80% are just really pro-Boris, and Paul is one of them, saying Boris will be the Conservative leader after the next election. Labour will win, it's a little bit less optimistic, but Boris will be the leader of the opposition. He should never have been forced to stand down in the first place.
And Peter's been in touch. Good morning to you, Peter, saying yes, Boris can do a comeback, but only when the UK economy is straight. And that's interesting because, as Catherine just alluded to there, Boris did say it wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
Didn't say he wasn't ever going to do it. So perhaps he's thinking the same thing as you, Peter. And Peter continues, he stops being influenced by his activist wife, who is imposing a hard green agenda on the British people, and he needs to engage his brain before opening his mouth. Peter says, give it 10 years. We'll see Boris back. Well, let us know what you think.
And there's lots to chew on there. And joining us now is political commentator Peter Spencer. Peter, looking back over the year in Boris, and certainly listening to GB News viewers there, do you think it's time for him to come back?
I don't think so, in point of fact. I mean, remember that he has been making an absolute fortune out there making speeches. There was one evening when he made double his prime ministerial annual salary for just one speech. I mean, what's not to like about that? I mean, I suspect that, glorious though it is to be world king, it does involve rather a lot of hard work. And I think that might have grated with him, most certainly. Sir Keir Starmer always said about him, look, trying to nail him down is like trying to nail a bowl of custard to a wall. And it has to be said that I think a lot of people within Downing Street have rather felt the same, which is why, in point of fact, the morale within Downing Street itself, in spite of the huge morass of problems they're facing, has rather picked up. They've actually got a boss who opens red boxes and actually reads what's in them, as opposed to Boris Johnson, who had this extraordinary knack of coming up with a wacky wheeze at breakfast time and then by lunchtime was arguing against it. Looking back at his record, however, I mean, there are two things that really stand out. One, he said, right, we've got an oven-ready deal for Brexit, so we've got Brexit done, yee-hee. Now we find that the latest opinion poll for The Times suggests that 2/3 of people who voted for Brexit now do not think it was a success, and there is a consensus among economists that Brexit has cost us all rather a lot of money. Against that, I think Boris Johnson's big claim to fame, and it is a real win, is that he managed to weaponize the English language in the same way as Churchill did in the beginning of the Second World War, in getting wavering European leaders to stand up and be counted and put their money where their mouth was as far as Ukraine was concerned. That, I think, was a huge hit, and I think hopefully the history books will remember that glorious achievement.
Peter, Michael's been in touch with us on GBNews at gbnews.uk, and he says, to me, it's absolutely ridiculous, the prospect of Boris Johnson becoming again the UK's Prime Minister. Why would we possibly want a repeat of his last premiership? And there is that school of thought, isn't there, Peter, about the three Ps that pushed Boris Johnson out of office: Patterson, Partygate and Pincher. What do you say to those people who say, look, far too much has happened? Look, we voted for him in 2019, but too much has happened now for him to ever have a successful comeback, and the British public, some at least, will never forgive Boris Johnson for that. What do you say to that?
Well, most certainly, while he was in office, he revealed himself in his true colours, which is a maverick, a buccaneer, a rule breaker, and unfortunately for him, there is a kind of a system in this country in which we do tend to keep to the rules to a reasonable degree. And I suspect that he in his heart of heart knows it as well, that his instincts of breaking rules and doing what the hell he likes do not play well ultimately with the process of trying to govern a country. And for that reason, although he says, oh, hasta la vista, baby, and all that stuff, I don't think he would come back, and I certainly don't think that the parliamentary party, however large or small it might be at the time, would welcome him back.
OK, Peter Spencer, thank you for joining us this morning from Britain's pinkest kitchen. Thank you very much. Now, another quick comment before we move on from Rick about timing. As you said, Boris thought about the timing and why come back in troubled waters. He's saying, let Labour have a term in power and completely mess it up and then bring Boris back to sort the country out. So there are a lot of people out there, Ellie, who think Boris is still the knight in shining armour to save the day.
Absolutely, and a lot of people voted for him in 2019, and it's Boris who won that vote, especially in those red wall seats. So many of them, including Jean, saying Rishi and Hunt is not who we voted for. Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk.
OK. Well, it's 7:24, and let's bring you up to date with all the other stories making the headlines today. The Labour Party wants to update Tony Blair's tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime slogan. The party will focus on prevention of crime by tackling the effects of trauma that could lead to people offending. This could mean victims of antisocial behaviour potentially determining how offenders are punished.
Pope Francis has asked for prayers for his predecessor, the former Pope Benedict, saying he's very sick. The Vatican says the 95-year-old had a sudden worsening of his health, but is receiving constant medical care. The former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope in 600 years to resign when he stepped down in 2013.
And the deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 60 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will be spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. It's issued a yellow alert for heavier rain for much of Scotland on Friday, warning of flooding and travel disruption to follow.
A new report claims the government won't meet its target of cutting the number of smokers in the country. Cancer Research UK says 8% of people will call themselves a smoker by 2030. That's despite MPs' plans for England to become smoke-free by then. The charity says while progress has slowed, it could take an extra 9 years to get to that point. Well, coming up next, we've got the latest sports headlines with Aidan McGee as Man City close the gap on Arsenal. That's after this short break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast here on GB News with Ellie Costello and myself, Martin Daubney.
Yes, still lots to come on today's programme. Food banks could soon be forced to turn hungry families away due to what's being branded a tsunami of need. We'll look at what can be done at 7:45.
And could Vladimir Putin be unseated? We look ahead at what's next in the Ukraine war at just after 8 o'clock.
And remember, you can join in any of our discussions this morning by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
And you can always tell when Aidan McGee has walked in the studio because he smells so lovely. You're a fine-smelling young man.
Well, I've promised you a scoosh later on, so you can smell just like me if you like.
I need to have a little blast
of
whatever you're on.
Can.
Anyway, we're here not to talk about cologne.
No.
But sport. So tell us, an amazing record. Erling Haaland has already smashed in 20 goals, the fastest ever in the Premier League.
So you think, I mean, he scored twice last night. This could have been done 5 weeks ago had there not been a World Cup. This is an extraordinary level of output. That's 20 goals in 15 games. The fastest player to... That's me on the left. You mean Haaland on the right.
No, not that guy. I rarely know who you're talking about, Aidan, so when I do, I want to
it's
let
a nice
you know.
Kit, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a flashback to some of their old away kits in the 80s and 90s. So Erling Haaland, 20 goals in 15 games, only 3 penalties. You know, you look back through history, there are quite a few strikers down the years who've had their numbers bloated by penalties. And I always think if you give a player 12 yards, to score a goal, they should possibly do it. But 17 of his 20 have come from open play. And more importantly, a huge, huge result for Leeds United, really. I mean, he's been completely dormant for 5 weeks because Norway didn't qualify for the World Cup. So he's been sitting at home.
Well rested.
Well rested, playing a couple of friendlies, just keeping himself fit, and he gets the chance. Funnily enough, although he's a Norwegian international, he didn't celebrate his goals last night. Can anyone guess why?
Go on.
He was born in Leeds. He was born in Leeds because his father, Alf Inge Haaland, played for Leeds United. He's a Leeds fan, and it was a very muted celebration. I mean, I'm not a fan. I'm not a massive fan of, I think if you play, you should celebrate with the fans who are paying your wages, quite frankly. But it's a lot of people wouldn't realise that he was born in Leeds. So incredible for him. And they've cut Arsenal's lead to 5 points. So that's quite important as well. 15 games gone. As for Leeds, odd statistic here, they're 15th in the league, played 15 points. So 15.
Doing better than my team, Forest, though, sadly. Transfer news. It's that time of year. What's going on?
Well, it's actually not just yet. The window doesn't open until January 1st, but clubs are getting their business done already, Martin. They're not mucking around. I mean, I cover so many of these. I mean, the amount of times when I covered QPR in 2013, QPR signed 5 players on January 31st. That, unsurprisingly, led to QPR's relegation because it was a sign of desperation. You don't want to be that pantomime club on the last day of the season. It sends out all the wrong messages. And so Liverpool and Chelsea are trying to get business done. £44 million is how much Liverpool could pay for Cody Gakpo. He scored 3 goals for Holland at the World Cup. He's come from PSV as their captain, 23 years old, very much one for the future. And Liverpool are doing things the way they did in the 1970s and 80s. They're prepared to pay big money for players, but just gently ease them into the first team. They're not going to put them in first straight away and say, there you go and score us 30 or 40 goals. They're going to say, let's do things the Liverpool way. Let's edge you in. He's a player who plays off the left-hand side. He's going to be one very exciting for the future. Chelsea have been told they're going to have to pay £105 million for Argentinian star Enzo Fernandez. He's a midfielder, starred at the World Cup, just got a winner's medal round his neck. They look as if they're going to lose 2 midfielders, Jorginho and N'Golo Kante, at the end of the season. So they're looking for replacements in that area. I don't know, it's interesting because Gakpo, who we just talked about, was one Man United were after. Liverpool stole a march on them. It looks like they knew about him. I wonder if they've done the thing that Premier League clubs used to do 20 years ago. Oh, he's good at the World Cup. Let's sign him and find him. Maybe he's not as good in the Premier League as he is in certain settings.
How much would they use the World Cup as an opportunity to kind of spot talent and think, I want you?
You certainly can't ignore it, Ellie, because they're playing highly pressurised games. Some of these players are at a higher level of intensity and pressure playing for their countries than there are even if they play for big clubs. I went to the African Nations Cup many years ago, and the players like Drogba and Essien were explaining to me, people in England don't understand that if we don't turn up for our international friendlies, we get a world of heat from our fans. So, look, pressurised games, rarefied environment in some ways. You have to pay credence to it. However, Premier League, Saturday, Wednesday, it can be very, very difficult. So you've just got to, with all transfers, Ellie, there's an element of risk, and you've just got to do your diligence. You look at the numbers throughout their in their league and domestic campaign. You look at what they do for international sides, and it should work. Quick bit of tennis, quick bit of politics. Of course, Djokovic has landed in Australia. He had his ban overturned. Of course, he was kept out because of his vaccine status before. He's going to go back and he wants to try and win the Australian Open. Yeah, he stuck to his guns, didn't he? Yeah. You know, he didn't. He could have relinquished that vaccination status last year and just had the vaccine pumped into his arm. But even though it was his tournament very much, he's won 9 of them. He's been the king of Melbourne Park really over the last 10, 15 years or so. But he didn't back down. But he's got in yesterday, landed in Adelaide. The tournament doesn't actually start. The main event doesn't start until January the 16th. But there's a warm-up tournament, the Adelaide International. He's not sure. See, I always... Djokovic to me has always been pretty misunderstood. I've interviewed him many, many times. He's a decent guy. He really is. But he doesn't have that warmth that, say, Nadal and Federer have when he goes around the world. And so, despite his excellence, and this is a sign of his humility. He's not sure. He's not taking his reception for granted. You know, yes, he owns that tournament, but some people in Australia will be very uncomfortable that he just didn't accede to the rules. There'll be others on the other side of the fence who say, you know what, he stuck to his guns. We're not a fan of this regime either, and let's go and see him win the tournament. But if he gets, it's a big chance for him to get to 22 Grand Slams. That would put him on level pegging with Nadal and 2 ahead of Federer.
Well, I personally hope he gets it. I think
he's a brilliant player. Yeah, he is a brilliant player and he's a decent guy. My friend bumped into him in a coffee shop in Monaco. Had a nice selfie with him.
Yeah,
it's always got a story to that, Aidan McGee. I'll find something for you.
He must have been wearing a good aftershave.
Yeah, but I bet it doesn't smell as good as you, Aidan McGee. Thank you very much. See you in the next hour.
I'll give you a scooch later, I promise.
Oh, before you go, we're talking about comfort food today.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
What's your favourite comfort food?
Comfort food is probably cheese on toast, actually. Oh, yeah, it's good. Or chestnut soup. Chestnut soup is a speciality of mine. And tonight I'm going to QPR. I'm having hospitality, 3-course menu. I haven't been in there for 5 weeks. I cannot wait to get my hands on that duck parfait starter.
Wow.
Duck parfait.
Wow, a man of many talents. You know, from duck parfait to cheese on toast. And
he can do it all.
Aidan McGee, top man on the island.
Yeah. We are talking about your favourite comfort food today. So GBNews at gbnews.uk. Aidan McGee's cheese on toast. Who knew? Thanks, Aidan. Brilliant. Now, coming up, we've got this morning's papers with Norman Baker and Sophie Kokora, and that's after this short break.
Cheese on toast.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, and let's bring you up to date with all the front pages.
The Express leads on Rishi Sunak committing to making the nation's streets and homes safe for everyone following a spate of Christmas violence.
The Mail asks if the Tories have given up on cutting tax after Chancellor Jeremy Hunt reportedly acts as a Treasury review of the whole tax system.
The Telegraph says taxpayer cash has been handed to groups promoting Islamist extremism.
I'll be covering that story soon, but in The Guardian, meanwhile, it focuses on families affected by dementia, warning of a national crisis in care safety.
And The Sun reports that civil servants have been handed £30 million worth of gift cards for shops and restaurants, including Primark and Nando's.
Lots to get our teeth into inside the papers now. And joining us this morning is the former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker on the political left, Liberal left, and the political commentator Sophie Corcoran, who is very much a young Maggie Thatcher. Sophie, let's start with you. A story that caught my eye as well, the front of the Telegraph today. This broke yesterday. Prevent, the counter-terrorism organisation, is being accused of being funded by the taxpayer, helping extremism within the UK.
Yep, so it's been seen that figures within organisations that would claim money through the Prevent's de-radicalisation programme do have links and have supported the Taliban or have supported groups that are banned Islamic extremist groups in the UK, which, I mean, is an enormous oversight from the government. I mean, the question is, how long on earth has this been going on for? But it just shows the lack of seriousness in the government to tackle Islamic extremism. And we are seeing it come through. Now, we had the issue in Batley and Spen, we had the issue over the film and all of the cinemas being attacked by these groups, and the government has to get a grip on Islamic extremism. And we have seen a shift in Prevent recently of trying to portray, far-right extremism and take a real focus on that. I mean, this is a massive crisis and a real oversight and a dereliction of Prevent's duty.
And I wonder, Norman, there's a report out yesterday saying 13,000 ISIS jihadists are about to be released from prison in Syria. We still have a security issue in the UK. We have very porous borders aligned to that. Is the Prevent system fit for purpose still?
I think it probably isn't. There has been a review. There's a dispute between Michael Gove and Philip Braverman, apparently, about what can be said and what has to be kept secret. I'm actually with Michael Gove, that if you had an independent report, you publish it. Yeah. I mean, what's the point of having it otherwise? But there is a serious issue with extremism. It's not going to go away, unfortunately. It's a fact of life these days. And it's extremism, Islamic extremism, but also there is extremism on the far right as well. Wherever it comes from, we have to defend our country against people who wish to undermine democracy. Democracy is what we believe in this country, and other people who are undertaking acts of terrorism and so on don't believe in democracy, and they have to be challenged. You can't just let these people get by.
And Sophie, can I put it to you as a Conservative? One of the problems here is that we have factions. Some people say publish it, some people censor it, ostensibly censor the report. And don't you think the British public have an absolute right to know if the taxpayer is funding organisations that in themselves are fostering extremist attitudes?
Yes, and it is an enormous matter of public safety. And back in the day, we used to be worried about enabling extremism coming through our country, through our borders. Now we're actively growing extremism through our own citizens and our own people through these groups like Prevent. So they're not coming from overseas anymore. They're being bred
homegrown
here in Britain. And it's an enormous concern, and it is getting worse. And we are seeing consistent trends of it getting worse here in the UK and globally as well. So we do really need to get a grip on it, and the taxpayers deserve to know.
And it's not just groups, actually, it's individuals who are becoming radicalised themselves, which is much more difficult for the security services to identify.
Norman, let's turn to one of your stories now on a different note. The Daily Mail is picking up on PPE fraudsters. £18 million has been recovered.
Well, and £613 million hasn't been recovered, is the key figure here for them. Only 3% of the fraud has been cleared up by efforts to recover it. We had a discussion in the previous hour, did we not, about tax and how the government was short of money and so on. Well, there's all this money being wasted on PPE. 630 million, it's criminal, actually. 12.6 billion was spent on procuring PPE, as much as 5% of contracts involving fraud or error, according to the Commons Public Accounts Committee. And I have to say that the whole process, if you remember, was partly Tory MPs giving their mates contracts without any proper scrutiny. And this is the consequence of it.
I wonder, is the Baroness Bra thing still haunting the government here, or is this just individual companies just ripping the government off?
I think it's individual companies ripping the government off, and they need to be prosecuted for it, not just simply the money recovered, but if people are guilty of fraud, let's have them up in the courts.
I'd agree with that.
Sophie, should we have a look at something in the Sun that's caught a lot of eyes this morning? See it there. £30 million worth of gift vouchers for shops and restaurants like Nando's. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yep, so the civil service are being given £30 million worth of gift vouchers to those sorts of stores, and people are saying that it is a massive slap in the face to the taxpayer here in the UK, as these individuals have spent majority of the last few years working from home, and many of them are so incredibly stubborn and do not want to go back to the office. This, of course, is causing all sorts of problems within, the DVLA, with passports, and all sorts of services that the British public should and rightly expect to be top-notch, because these people refuse to do their jobs properly and refuse to return to the office. So it is, unbecoming that these people are getting these sorts of gifts and these rewards, while the British taxpayers are struggling financially and struggling because these people aren't doing their jobs as well as they should do.
And it's just worth pointing out there are a few figures in this story today, Sophie. The Foreign Office still only has 49% of people back at work. The Department of Work and Pensions, 61%, and the Home Office, 62%. So, Norman, is this basically bribery to get people to go back to work, to go for a Nando's at lunch, to go for a Greggs on their way in? Is this a bribe?
I think the two things are probably unconnected, but I think it's crass. It's probably a way to avoid giving people a pay rise, actually, and keep the overall pay increase down. That's probably what it is, rather than anything else. But, people at home doesn't necessarily mean they're not working. But on the other hand, half the people at home does seem quite a large number. I think a sort of balance where you're 4 days in the office and 1 day at home is probably the right sort of balance to strike, and we're some way from that with some of the government departments.
Norman, let's stick with you and turn our attention to Ukraine, shall we? Because last week we saw President Zelensky in Washington securing more US support, and he's now seeking global support for a peace plan that is in the army.
Yes. I mean, let's just reflect on Zelensky, who was actually, I think he was a comedian, wasn't he, officially, before he became president. I mean, cometh the man, cometh the hour. I mean, incredible what he's achieved under hugely difficult circumstances. He's been under pressure, I think, from some of the Western allies to look for a peace plan, because they say, well, we can't keep funding weapons indefinitely. We have to have a solution to this. I think he's been resisting that. His peace plan actually involves everything he wants, including keeping hold of Crimea, which, to be fair, is a disputed territory. The rest of the stuff isn't, but Crimea is a disputed territory. So whether that leads to anything or not, I don't know. But he's seeking to involve the Indians, who, of course, have been quite supportive of Russia, and that's probably quite a smart move. He's proving quite a smart diplomat, Zelensky.
Sophie, can I put it to you that the kind of eulogising of Zelensky, I mean, he more or less has been sort of treated as a global political superstar. Against the backdrop, don't forget, Ukraine always was a very corrupt country. Yep. It was 122 out of 180 in the corruption index in the world. 23% of people in Ukraine before the war had to pay bribes to public officials. Do you think that this endless money we're sending to Ukraine, could there be some unforeseen consequences?
Yeah, I definitely think there could, and I don't think it's beyond reasonable to ask for an audit of where is this money going? How is it being used?
And that's what Rishi Sunak was asking for,
and this is what we want. A lot of people are saying, you're being unreasonable, you're being pro-Putin if you ask for this data. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. If you're sending such enormous, large taxpayer money that people like me and you are going to have to pay, we want to know that it's going for a right cause. And he's now coming up with a peace deal. He should have been looking at this sort of thing from day one, because there's no way that he can sustain this war. And I started to get a feeling recently that that's sort of what he wants. He as a person has done very well out of this war, as the Ukrainian people obviously have been suffering enormously. And I think a lot of the things that did it for me was the Vogue photo shoots while his own people were dying, the appearances at Glastonbury. I just found them to be really tasteless. While his own citizens were suffering, while his own country was being destroyed, he was acting like a celebrity, and I thought it was irresponsible.
Well, he would say to that, wouldn't he, that he wants to be on the front pages, he wants to be at the front of people's minds, that he doesn't want people to forget about the war in Ukraine. I think it is important as well to remember the context of, those numbers there that you're talking about a corrupt Ukraine, that a lot of the time it was under a pro-Russia leadership. And we had the head of the British Army speaking to us on yesterday's programme, might have even been the day before, who was saying that the last thing we should be calling for is peace, because he said this is about all of us, really, and our shared values and our shared freedoms, and we need to push back against Putin.
We need to give Putin and his inner circle some face-saving way of getting out, because ultimately every war ends in diplomacy. Where, it's a matter of time. But I mean, quite clearly, if you either carry on indefinitely until Russia is smashed, which will take a very, very long time and a great deal of money, or you find some face-saving way out. And I think probably, Zelensky wouldn't want it, but probably the way out of it is to let them keep Ukraine and keep Crimea and withdraw from every other territory.
Look, I just wonder how many people out there may think that endless billions to a war is not the sort of way we should be spending money when we can barely afford to feed our children. Let's move on anyway to the next, if we can, Sophie.
Yes.
Something we've been covering all morning on GB News. Italy resuming its testing of COVID with incoming passengers from China.
Yeah, so you had the lovely Albie on this morning to talk about it quite a lot of times, and I wanted to cover this story because I really disagreed with the angle that he was coming from. And I think it is perfectly reasonable to be testing the people on Chinese flights to come into their country in order to prevent there being a lockdown in the country they're coming to. I think it's morally wrong, should the government not do that, for them to then put us in another lockdown and have the rest of the British people lose their freedoms, businesses again suffer, the economy collapse. I mean, I was in school at the time of lockdowns, I lost my education, which obviously wasn't fair. And I think that if he has the opportunity to test these people coming from foreign countries to ensure that they're not bringing this virus back into this country, I would absolutely prefer that than then put us in another lockdown. And I have the same policy towards those of the migrants that are coming into this country, bringing in diseases such as diphtheria. We need to be making sure that we are not spreading them around the country and that we know what the diseases they are carrying so that we do not sleepwalk into another pandemic and have needlessly amounts of people die or needlessly crash our economy. It is the morally right thing and the morally sensible thing to do.
A lot of people agree with that. Norman?
Well, we're going to recreate the famous 2010 coalition, I think, here, because I agree with that view by and large as well. I mean, look, China has had a different policy from the rest of the world. It's tempted to lock down and to keep this thing at bay, and now it's all been let loose in China, and there's a huge problem over there. And I think the Italy situation was half the people arriving on some plane from China had COVID, half of them. We can't have that. So we've actually got to treat China as a special case, and I think we do have to have COVID testing for Chinese people coming into the country. Absolutely.
OK, just to wind up now, we've been talking about comfort food all morning. Now, Sophie, I wanted to pick up on something that you put out on social media, which got you a bit of stick. I thought it was rather sweet. You didn't enjoy a traditional turkey dinner on Christmas Day, did you? What did you have?
I had a microwavable Tesco's curry.
But I believe we have a photo of it, and here it is. If you are listening on the radio, do you want to describe this for us, Sophie? Tell us about this meal.
So it's just,
special.
your microwavable 5-minute whack it in the oven Christmas curry with some skinny fries from McCain's that you can stick in the air fryer for about 10 minutes and toast. And most people were overtly outraged about the toast part. But, I mean, you have bread. It's just warm bread.
But would you not have a naan bread? Because it's me that was really quite shocked by the toast. The white buttered toast alongside a curry. Would you not just have a naan bread or a poppadom?
No, I do like a naan bread, but I didn't have any naan bread, so I thought I'd have to festive it up with a bit of toast.
I think that's a bit of fusion going on there. You're fusing traditional British toast.
I mean, I just don't like roast dinner. I think roast dinner is gross. It's a bit minging, and Christmas is the time to eat whatever you want. So if you want to, yam 2 Toblerones before 7 a.m, you do it, and I'm gonna eat my curry.
You don't like a roast dinner though? That is sacrilegious.
Yeah, because in the comfort food list in today's Daily Mirror, page 3, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding is the top. So we've got
I like
curry.
the Yorkshire pudding part. It's just, you know what really puts me off a roast? Potatoes. I don't like roast potatoes. Oh. I just think that's like...
against potatoes.
Yeah, I think that's like
Unbelievably, there is no curry dish on the entire top 20 comfort foods. Norman, what's your top comfort food?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what I have for Christmas dinner, first of all, which is mushroom Wellington, being a good Lib Dem.
Nice.
And that was a very nice... Yeah, veggie, mushroom Wellington from a super shop in Lewis. And then very nice it was too, with roast potatoes, I might say.
I reckon you prefer the curry, didn't you?
It went viral, didn't it? So tell us how many views that got.
Oh, it got millions. I think it was around 8 million. But hopefully...
8 million people.
Hopefully, it's not on the list this year, but by next year, I'm pretty confident it will be.
And the answer to your question, Martin, was fish and chips.
Fish and chips. Good choice, a good choice. I thought you were going vegan on us there, Norman. Norman, Sophie, thank you very much.
So much.
Excellent stuff. We'll see you again in an hour's time.
Well, it's just about to go 3 minutes past 7. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's stories.
And the government says there are no plans to introduce mandatory corona tests for visitors from China. This comes after China reportedly is experiencing an influx of cases since COVID restrictions have been eased. Other countries like the USA have now imposed new measures for travellers from China after accusing them of a lack of information transparency.
A woman has been arrested on suspicion of neglect over 8-year-old's death linked to Strep A in Wales. That's according to the BBC. The 33-year-old was taken into custody on the 23rd of December, but has been released as inquiries continue. The UK Health Security Agency data shows that 21 children under 18 in England have died from the infections, whilst 3 children have been recorded dead in Belfast and Wales.
And provisional Met Office figures show 2022 has been the warmest year on record. By the end of December, experts say we'll have seen the highest annual average temperature. It will beat the record set in 2014 of just under 10 degrees Celsius. The Met Office says every month, apart from December, has been warmer than average. Well, hungry families could be turned away from food banks amid the cost of living crisis.
Yes, a survey by the Independent Food Aid Network found that 91% of food banks had seen greater demand this winter compared to last year. Meanwhile, separate figures suggest that 69% of food banks had seen a fall in food and cash donations.
Bringing us more on what's been dubbed a tsunami of need, Cathy Bland, the chair of trustees at Leominster Food Bank. Good morning. So tell us, how big has this trend been, and what types of people are you seeing coming to a food bank these days as opposed to before?
So we've seen over double the number of people that we saw last year. We're a little market town in Leominster. We wouldn't expect to see hundreds of people coming, but in December alone this year, we saw 465 people. We're open tomorrow, so we've not even seen the last of our December figures yet. Last year we saw over 1,000 people. This year 2,400 we've already given out. That's food parcels that we've given out, and we're seeing all sorts of people, so working people, older people, lots of retired people coming, and a huge increase in the number of children, particularly children of larger families. So there might be working families, but if they got over 2 children, they're not going to get their child benefit. For those extra children, if they're on benefits, they won't be getting any benefits at all for child 3, 4 or 5. So it's really large families that are struggling, but all families, we're seeing lots of people coming through our doors that we would not expect to see at a food bank. And it's really sad and shocking, and we could do with the government doing something about it. People need more benefits and higher wages so they can afford the basic costs of living. It's not a choice about providing extras and luxuries for their families. It's about being able to pay the rent and have some money to put on your electric, quite honestly.
And like you say, Cathy, families that you wouldn't expect to see in a food bank and perhaps have never been reliant on a food bank before, but we are in a cost of living crisis, and that does mean that even working families, some of them struggling to put food on the table. One of the figures that's really struck me this morning is separate figures that show 69% of food banks have actually seen a fall in donations. And I suppose we have to look at that side of the coin as well, because in a cost of living crisis, people who could previously afford to donate to a food bank and afford to give extra simply can't help anymore.
Yeah, we've always relied on the generosity of our community, which has been fabulous. But as you say, people can only give what they can afford to give. So we're finding that donations in supermarkets and in our donation points have really, really fallen, to the extent that we are buying the majority of our food now. We're in the fortunate position that people's financial donations haven't dropped, but people's food donations have. So we're last week, week before Christmas, we spent over £2,000 on food to supplement what had been given, so that we could keep food going out as it comes in. But no food is staying on our shelves. We absolutely need every item that people donate, whether that's tinned meat or tinned veg or pasta and rice. Typically, food banks are never short of baked beans, but we ended up buying baked beans last week. So that's an indication of where we are at the moment.
Well, Kathy at Leominster Food Bank, thank you so much for the work you're doing this Christmas. God bless you.
If people...
We lost her.
If people wanted to donate, we use the app, and lots of food banks use the app, bankthefood.org. It's a free app. You install it on your phone. You get a little reminder when you go into supermarkets about what we need most. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kathy. And that's a really good point, isn't it? And you can donate anything you've got in your cupboards. Something is better than nothing.
OK, you're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Ellie and Martin. Lots more to come over the next 2 hours. We'll be looking back at Boris Johnson's premiership and asking, what does the future hold for the war in the Ukraine?
That's after this short break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
The British government has said it has no plans to introduce travel restrictions on visitors from China as COVID rapidly spreads throughout the country.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Thursday the 29th of December. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and Martin Daubney. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
The UK will not reintroduce mandatory COVID tests for anyone arriving from China. That's despite the USA announcing that from January the 5th, all Chinese arrivals will need to provide a negative COVID test before they take off. It comes as UK Border Force staff begin the second in a series of strikes at UK airports until New Year's Eve.
Pope Francis has said the former Pope, Benedict XVI, is very ill, and he has asked pilgrims at the Vatican to pray for him. Benedict became the first leader of the Catholic Church to stand down in 600 years in 2013, citing advanced age.
And 2022 will be the warmest year on record for the United Kingdom. Aside from the summer peak, the Met's office said all 4 seasons in Britain this year were in the top 10 warmest since records began in 1884.
Remember, you can get in touch any of the usual ways you know by now, gbnews at gbnews.uk. Let us know where you're watching and listening to us from. We're also on Twitter at GBNews. Lots to talk about this morning. We're talking about Britain's top comfort food, which is roast beef.
and also Boris Johnson, should he come back, should he stay or should he go? That's been sending people mad this morning, Ali.
It really, really has. And we've also been speaking about China's COVID response. Should the UK be testing Chinese passengers who are flying into the United Kingdom since they've lifted their zero COVID policy? The US is now testing passengers, so is Italy. Should the UK be doing the same? Currently, we're not doing so. Let us know if you think that's the right idea. gbviews@gbnews.uk. This is our top story today, and as we were just saying, the US has announced that all travellers from China must provide a negative COVID-19 test in order to enter the country, and they join other nations that are imposing restrictions because of a surge of infections in China. But as we were saying, the UK government has said it doesn't plan to follow suit.
And the increase in cases across China follows the rollback of the nation's strict antivirus controls. Beijing's zero COVID policies had kept the country's infection rate low, but fueled public frustration and crushed economic growth. Well, joining us now is political commentator Peter Spencer. So, Peter, we've seen tough measures imposed if you want to go into America, tough measures into Italy after 50% of passengers on 2 flights into Milan tested positive of COVID. Should the UK follow suit, or should we keep calm and carry on?
Well, clearly that is the policy at this moment, is to keep calm and carry on. Who knows if that might change if we get a fair number of people coming over from China to test it and who subsequently emerge actually do have COVID and it starts to spread. But the point is made with some emphasis that Britain actually is really very heavily vaccinated, and also our therapies have improved vastly. So the likelihood of dying of COVID in hospital, unless there's some very severe underlying condition, is actually extremely low.
To bring Sophie Corcoran's comments from the last paper review to you. She spoke about the impact of COVID on our mental health, on our businesses, on our economy, and there is fear out there. Looking at China and looking at the fact that they've been locked up for 3 years, that we are opening the floodgates to we don't quite know what. I mean, so many of the Chinese population live in rural communities, they're unvaccinated. There is a concern that there could be a new variant that we simply wouldn't yet be aware of. And people are fearing another set of lockdowns and impact on their businesses. Do you think that is a fear? And if so, is it reasonable?
Well, it most certainly is a fear. Whether it's reasonable or not is another matter. I mean, I'll be honest, when I first read that Britain, unlike the United States, is not going to be testing people coming in from China, I was rather surprised. However, remember that when COVID first hit, it actually really slugged everybody in government for 6. And if they're not super wary now, I would be even more surprised. Therefore, I suspect that what they're doing is monitoring the situation extremely carefully. And of course, if they do find, oh my goodness gracious me, this stuff is starting to spread around, then I think they'd clamp down extremely quickly.
OK, Peter, I want to turn to domestic politics now, if I can. We have an incoming new General Secretary of the TUC, Paul Nowak, who perhaps should change his name to Paul No Way. He's already saying it's only a matter of time before there are coordinated strikes, echoes of the general strikes of yesteryear. You and I are old enough to remember those. Of course, he's threatened to walk out of talks before they even start. This guy sounds like a nightmare for Rishi Sunak. Is it time for Rishi to blink first, pay the unions and get the country open again?
Well, it's very interesting, this. There are quite a lot of people within the Parliamentary Conservative Party who are thinking, look, this is his Thatcher moment. He's got to stand firm. But against that, there is I get a sense that although Mr. No Way is sounding a little bit on the firmish side, he's not sounding quite as firm as I might have expected him to be. And it's worth remembering that when people go on strike, they actually tend not to get paid. Therefore, there's a very powerful disincentive from their point of view from actually engaging in this kind of action. That said, again, I suspect that what Rishi Sunak will probably do is a certain amount of divide and rule here, the nurses clearly are so up in arms, and the ambulance drivers, that I think he might be tempted to make not sort of explicitly a special case out of them, but to indicate that he does plan a kind of a fast track system. So even if they don't do that well this year, next year they will do well and they'll get the pay rise sooner than they normally would.
Well, Peter, do you think there's a case of now the longer these strikes goes on, it is a bit like COVID, we just learn to live with it. We're working around it. If we can't get a train, we're taking our cars. The mail doesn't turn up. What's new? I mean, my post is dodgy at the best of times. Do you think public sympathy is now just turning against these strikes, and really the government can just hold firm and it'll just fizzle out?
Well, that's my point. I mean, I suspect that that's what will happen in a large number of cases. And, Sunak's consistent line has been, look, if we up wages to match inflation, all it will do is stoke inflation. And, of course, that, in the end, does hit the poorest hardest. And so, I mean, he hasn't given any indication thus far that he does intend to buckle. All that said, I find it quite interesting that voices within the parliamentary Conservative Party is being raised, say, stand firm and make sure that people jolly well play by the rules. Well, they're not setting much of an example, given ever since Sunak has actually taken over as Prime Minister, there has been a serial succession of backbench rebellions, and to such a point that it's really very factionalized, to such a point that Sunak at one point had to decide which faction am I going to pay off to sort out the other one. And that, I suspect, is going to be his biggest problem, that the command structure within the parliamentary Conservative Party has essentially broken down. The usual rule is that people, if they're not happy about something, Tory MPs, they will huff and puff, but they won't actually blow the house down. All that's changed. They are likely to do so. So his highly respectable majority suddenly looks like it's just floated away into the mid-distance.
Peter, there's been a spate of violence over this festive period. Elle Edwards was shot at a pub on Christmas Eve. She was with her sister and her friends, just 26 years old, I believe. Cody Fisher just stabbed to death in a nightclub in Birmingham on Boxing Day. Two young people with their lives ahead of them. In response, Rishi Sunak has pledged to make Britain's streets safer. How do you think he's going to do that?
Well, let us put this thing into context. What has happened is that the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has announced that he plans to crack down on antisocial behaviour, even to a point of letting victims have a say in what the punishments are. Now Keir Starmer has for a long time been seeking a chance to show that he's not just a boring technocrat, but he actually is on the front foot, and this is one of his big initiatives, and it's one with which clearly the public will engage. Now, the story about so basically reprising Tony Blair, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. He's setting out to be even tougher on crime, even tougher on the causes of crime. But what's happened is that the Daily Express, which is a great cheerleader for the Tory party anyway, has rung up Number 10 and said, yeah, what about all this stuff from Starmer? To which there has been a spokesman has said, oh, yes, well, we take crime jolly seriously. We want to make the streets safer. So that is just situation normal, status quo. So to suggest that Rishi Sunak is suddenly lashing out at criminals, I think is, it's for the birds, really.
Well, Peter Spencer, thanks for joining us once again, sitting pretty in your wonderful pink kitchen. See you again soon, mate.
Do my best.
Thank you. Now, this morning, Ukraine has reported suffering a new wave of missile strikes from air and sea, with a presidential advisor saying more than 120 warheads had been launched. The attack comes after the former head of the British Army warned that Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals unless Russia manages to turn the war in its favour.
Speaking exclusively to GB News, General Lord Richard Dannett said strategic losses and rapidly falling morale could open the real possibility of Putin's enforced removal. But Lord Dannett told our Home and Security editor Mark White it was vital that the US, the UK and other allies continue to stay the course in supplying Ukraine with state-of-the-art Western weapons systems.
For the better part of a year, Ukraine has been under relentless Russian bombardment. From missile strikes to tank and artillery fire, as Russian forces push to consolidate their gains. But in recent months, against seemingly insurmountable odds, the Ukrainians have been pushing back. A counter-offensive making key gains. Chief among them, recapturing the strategically important southern city of Kherson. The former head of the British Army believes if Ukraine can keep up that momentum in the months ahead, then the Russian president could find it increasingly difficult to cling on to power.
I could see a set of circumstances where the Russian military's morale would collapse. When you've lost the will to win, when you've decided that you're defeated in your own head, then you will lose. And of course, if that was to happen, that's a game changer. I think we would see a change of regime in the Kremlin. I think we would see Putin out.
There's no doubting the bravery and resolve of the Ukrainians, but it's sophisticated Western-supplied weapon systems that's helped give them the edge in many of their encounters with Russian forces. Lord Dannatt says it's absolutely vital that the US in particular stands firm in its support of Ukraine.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
Also key is the continuation of the training of Ukrainian volunteers, particularly by Britain and Poland.
Yeah, so I'm going to place the TMH at the front. I'm going to ensure that the pins, are pulled out as we previously did, yeah?
Around 10,000 Ukrainians are being trained in the UK before returning home to take up the fight. In the months ahead, Ukraine has to keep up the momentum and continue making gains in its counter-offensive. Its stated aim to push Russia out of all Ukrainian territory. Defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford believes recapturing Crimea would guarantee their victory.
He or she who controls the Crimea or holds the Crimea basically controls the Black Sea and the entrance to the Sea of Azov. If the Ukrainians manage to take Crimea, that might be the point at which they are prepared to negotiate for peace.
In recent months, Russia has stepped up its strikes on key civilian infrastructure, heaping even more misery on Ukraine's population. Sadly, it is a grim pattern. The more military success Ukraine enjoys on the battlefield, the more its beleaguered towns and cities will suffer the effects of increased Russian bombardment. Mark White, GB News.
Now, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson presided over our country during a global pandemic and a war in Europe. But earlier this year, Conservative MPs decided he'd become an electoral liability and he was replaced with Liz Truss.
Yet in a new poll of Conservative members, Boris remains more popular than current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Our political reporter Catherine Forster takes a look back over Boris's tumultuous 2022.
Just 2 years earlier, Johnson had won an 80-seat majority on his promise to get Brexit done. But 2022 began badly. The latest Partygate revelation was the most shocking yet. Number 10 staff had partied with suitcases of wine the night before the Queen sat alone at Prince Philip's funeral. The Prime Minister apologised to Her Majesty for the behaviour of his staff. Tory grandee David Davis was scathing.
You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Partygate took a back seat when Russia invaded Ukraine in February, and Johnson led the West's response in offering strong support to Volodymyr Zelensky.
How are you?
In Ukraine, the beleaguered British Prime Minister became a hero. Back home, In April, he was fined by police for breaking lockdown rules by attending a brief birthday gathering in June 2020.
Today, I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police. Let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology.
In May, Sue Gray's long-awaited report into lockdown gatherings was finally published. It was damning. The Conservatives did terribly in local elections and lost by-elections both to Labour and the Lib Dems. Many Tory MPs had had enough. A confidence vote followed on the 6th of June.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
An uneasy truce ensued until Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher was suspended for sexual misconduct, and Downing Street's ever-changing recollections of what Johnson had known and when became too much for MPs to bear. Health Secretary Sajid Javid resigned first, followed minutes later by Chancellor Rishi Sunak. The following day, ministers resigned faster than Johnson could replace them. On July the 7th, he admitted defeat.
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
He channeled Arnold Schwarzenegger in his final PMQs.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Come September, he met the Queen and in his final speech obliquely hinted at a possible return.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
Cincinnatus was a Roman general who returned to office in his country's hour of need. Later, Liz Truss's premiership had imploded and the Conservative Party needed another leader fast. It couldn't be Johnson, could it? As the calls to bring back Boris grew, he raced back from his Caribbean holiday and hit the phones. He and the favourite Sunak met, but on the Sunday night, Johnson announced it was not the right time and withdrew. Since then, he's joined rebellions on onshore wind and says he will fight the next election. Johnson has made over £1 million for just 4 speeches. Analysts say he could make £5 million a year. Some comfort, perhaps, for the man who wanted to be world king. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Well, it's certainly true, Addy, that Boris has certainly got his knockers, but not many amongst the GB News viewers today. It's about 80% of people want Boris to come back. Jim is one of them. He's saying here, for all of his faults, people voted for Boris, not for the Tories. Interesting. I see that since Sunak has got in, he hasn't really done anything that makes me feel I want to vote for him or the party, apart from constant sound bites that mean nothing. In fact, I'll be looking for a Reform candidate or another party, because they've just lost faith in the Tories, because for them, it's all about Boris. And a lot of people are saying the same thing this morning.
Yep. GB viewers have always said Boris is an election winner, and it's who they voted for in 2019. And Rishi Sunak is not who they voted for. Many of them not very happy with that. So do let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We're also talking about the best comfort food. What was yours again?
Roast turkey.
Roast turkey,
You'll have it
yeah,
again
that's what you're
after
having.
the show.
Can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
Martin. Mine was a roast as well, actually, and we're all on the same kind of vibe. Britain's top 20 comfort food have been ranked in the Daily Mirror. Roast beef and Yorkshire pud comes number 1, followed by apple crumble and custard, and third place, a margherita pizza. So we're asking you today, what is your go-to comfort food?
And interestingly, Ellie, in the entire top 20, there is no curry dish, although our contributor Sophie Corcoran earlier, of course, posted a picture of her having a rather sad-looking, I think, microwave Tesco curry on Christmas Day.
Yes, and apparently this is the go-to for her. So what did she say? It was McCain frozen chips as a side dish there, and some white buttered toast, which is what I took issue with.
Yeah, and I think
the white buttered toast. Come on, Sophie.
I think for some that's a kind of fusion too far. Curry on toast. I mean, I think it sounds all right.
Yeah, no, I'm not won over by that, Sophie. I'm so sorry.
You're not having it.
Do
All
let
right.
us know, because it really did. Twitter went into uproar once you posted that picture on Christmas Day. 8 million views, she said. Let us know what you make of that. GBViews at gbnews.uk.
And if you're feeling hungry, that's OK. It is 8:22, and let's bring you up to date with all the stories making the headlines today.
The Labour Party wants to update Tony Blair's tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime slogan. The party will focus on the prevention of crime by tackling the effects of trauma that could lead people to offend. This could mean victims of antisocial behaviour potentially determining how offenders are punished.
And Pope Francis has asked for prayers for his predecessor, former Pope Benedict XVI, saying he's very sick. The Vatican says the 95-year-old had a sudden worsening of his health but is receiving constant medical care. The former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope in 600 years to resign when he stepped down in 2013, and we'll make sure we keep you updated all morning.
The deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 60 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will bring spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. It's issued a yellow alert for heavy rain for much of Scotland on Friday, warning of flooding and travel disruption too.
And a new report claims the government won't meet its target of cutting the number of smokers in the country. Cancer Research UK says 8% of people will call themselves a smoker by 2030, despite MP's plans for England to become smoke-free by then. The charity says while progress has slowed, it could take an extra 9 years to get to that point. Hi, you're watching and listening to Breakfast here on GB News with Ellie Costello and Martin Daubney. Up next, it's Andrew Tate versus Greta Thunberg in the latest celebrity smackdown. And where is Kanye West? Eddie Phillips has the latest showbiz news right after this break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament.
But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast here on GB News with Eddie Costello and myself, Martin Daubney.
Still lots to come on today's programme. Pope Francis has asked for prayers for his predecessor, Benedict XVI, after claiming that the 95-year-old is very sick. More on this very worrying news out of the Vatican at 8:50.
And as Ukraine reports another wave of missile strikes, what will happen next in the war with Russia? We'll take a look just after 9 a.m.
And remember, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews, and we're going to share as many as we can throughout the programme with you.
Well, one of the most controversial men on the internet, Andrew Tate, was left seeing red courtesy of Green activist Greta Thunberg after he goaded her about his collection of gas-guzzling cars.
Well, our showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips joins us now in the studios. This was Tate versus Thunberg. It was the showdown that no one saw coming in 2022, but it's happened, hasn't it?
It has happened. For people that don't know, Andrew Tate is a very controversial figure. We probably know him best in the UK because he was in Big Brother in 2016. Yeah. He's actually a former world champion kickboxer, and he got chucked out of Big Brother because a video emerged of him beating a woman with a belt and verbally abusing her. Since then, he's gone on to become this kind of lifestyle guru, but a very different type of lifestyle guru than we were used to, promulgating these very misogynistic views. He's been shut down on YouTube, but he's still on Twitter. And so he went for Greta Thunberg yesterday, tweeted her saying, I have all these gas-guzzling cars. I can tell you all about them. Please provide your email address so I can send you all of this information. And in the fastest takedown, really clever, Greta tweeted back. She said, yes, please enlighten me. Email me at smallbleepenergy@getalife.com, referring to his manhood. Yeah. And people were like, brilliant, go for it. We love that. And just so people don't know, because I've seen some people tweeting about this, what she's referring to then, small bleep energy, is essentially someone who's very cocky because they're overcompensating. But it's in the opposite to thing we use a lot at the moment, which is BDE, which is big bleep energy, and that is someone who is just naturally confident and has a nice aura about them because they are very confident in who they are. So yeah, just to clarify that.
Can I just say you've done a very good job with that earlier. I was getting nervous with you there with the bleep, so I was like, can she do it? Yes, you can.
The people in the gallery like, phew, right, cup of tea time.
Too early for that, Ellie,
but it's not the first time Greta has done one of these smackdowns, is it?
No, Greta is really great on Twitter. If you don't know, you should follow her. She's got like 5 million or so followers. So in 2019, Donald Trump, who was president at the time, was outraged because Time magazine named her their person of the year, and he was like, what? So he tweeted, so ridiculous. He said, Greta must work on her anger management problem, then go to a good old-fashioned movie with a friend, chill, Greta, chill. So in response, she changed her Twitter bio to a teenager working on her anger management problem, currently chilling and watching a good old-fashioned movie with a friend. And people were like, we love it. She's just taken it and twisted it. And then 2 years later, when his presidency ended, she tweeted that picture of him climbing onto a helicopter. This is it, you can see it on screens now. And she said, she used his kind of language that he'd used on her years before, spun it around and mocked him, saying, he seems like a very happy old man looking forward to a bright and wonderful future.
And do you think she does those herself, or does she have a team of people who do tweets for her?
I think she just does it herself, you know. But the thing is, she's a 19-year-old girl. You know, we obviously, she's this incredible eco-activist, but she's probably really sassy as a person. We just don't know that side of her. And I think she can be herself a little bit more in that. And I think it's nice that she's not afraid to take on these big figures who have opinions on her and seem to be intimidated by her somewhat, including Vladimir Putin.
Okay.
She didn't take on Putin.
She did.
Wow.
Well, not directly. He's not on Twitter. But he branded her a kind girl, but poorly informed. So she changed her Twitter bio to a kind but poorly informed teenager. She just takes them on. She's also taken on Meatloaf when he claimed that she was brainwashed. And she said, it's not about Meatloaf. It's not about me. It's about scientific fact, and put some charts. But my favourite one ever was in 2020. There was an actress who was on Celebrity Mastermind in the UK, and she couldn't remember Greta's name as the correct response in an answer to a question. So she just blurted out, Sharon. And this clip went viral. And so Greta obviously picked up on it and changed her name on Twitter to Sharon. So she engages really well in social media when it comes to that. And yeah, she's not afraid to take someone down when she needs to.
Good. OK, somebody else who's making the news, again, not for all the right reasons, certain Mr Kanye West. He's gone AWOL.
This has not been Kanye's year for many, many reasons. But yeah, there's a rumour going around that he's missing, but it's a bit of a complicated one. So his former business manager, Thomas St. John, has said he can't locate Kanye to serve him papers.
Where's Kanye?
Where's Kanye? That's the thing. Where's Kanye? In what is a $4.5 million lawsuit. So this has sparked rumours that he's missing because in the filing, Thomas at St John has basically said, I've tried serving him at 3 of his homes in LA, can't get to him. We were informed of who his lawyers were, but they said they've disown themselves, you know, they don't have anything to do with him anymore. So we can't actually serve him these papers. Where is he? He's gone missing. I don't think he has gone missing. He was pictured on like the 14th of December. And, he, you know, I think we would have heard about it if Kanye was actually missing. And he might have tried these 3 residences in California, but Kanye has a lot more residences than that. He's got this sprawling ranch in Wyoming and things like that. But essentially, the lawsuit is because back in March, the business manager came on board and made Kanye sign an 18-month agreement with $300,000 a month. And the reason he did this is because he said, I don't want him to just walk away from this deal. You know, he's erratic and things like this. Yeah. He did. 3 months later, Kanye tried to sever the deal. And so the business manager is now going after him for the remainder of the money that's owed, which he's claiming is $4.5 million.
Isn't that kind of small change, though, for a bloke like Kanye West? £4.5 million quid, it's like me giving you a fiver.
Exactly, 100%, although I wouldn't say no to a fiver. But the thing is Kanye actually had $2 billion wiped off his net worth in a day earlier this year after he tweeted all these anti-Semitic comments and he went on podcasts in America and was spouting all of this hate speech. So we don't know, maybe he, you know, needs a bit of cash and he can't afford to pay this and he is in hiding.
Well, hasn't been Kanye's year, has it?
Yeah, if you're out there, Kanye, get in touch. we can connect you. Ellie will be the
I'll
middle
hook you up, it's fine.
Yeah. Let us know where you are, we'll give you a shout out. That's what we always say, isn't it? Ellie, you've been brilliant, as always.
Thank you very much.
An Ellie sandwich, Martin.
I know, I love it. I'm happy to be the meat and an Ellie sandwich all day long. Did I come out wrong?
It's all right,
a little bit, yeah.
Let's move on.
We'll move on swiftly, yes.
Well, stay with us. We'll go through the papers next. It's been a very lively morning. More of the same with Norman Baker and Sophie Corcoran right after this break. Stay with us.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome back. We're still not over that comment.
No, we're not.
Before, but we're trying to move along. It's 8:36 in the morning. Let's bring you up to date with today's front pages.
The Express leads on Rishi Sunak committing to making the nation's streets and homes safe for everyone following a spate of Christmas violence.
The Mail asks if the Tories have given up on cutting tax after Chancellor Jeremy Hunt reportedly axes a Treasury review of the system.
Telegraph says taxpayers' cash has been handed to groups promoting Islamist extremism.
The Guardian focuses on families affected by dementia, warning of a national crisis in care safety.
And the Sun reports civil servants have been handed £30 million in gift cards for shops and restaurants, including Primark and Nando's. Ding ding, it's round 3. It's time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning is former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker, looking splendid in mustard on the end there, and political commentator Sophie Corcoran, looking magnificent in emerald green. Colourful set of opinions.
We've got all the primary colours today.
Yeah.
Just need you in a red tie.
I'm a little bit green too, but look. So Norman, a bit of a serious story to start with. This broke yesterday in the Times.
Yes.
And it's talking about MPs' behaviour on overseas trips. A little bit of dodgy stuff going on with prostitution and things like that. Right?
Well, to be fair to the MPs, I think the prostitutes were landed in their rooms without them asking for them, so they didn't command them. But, I mean, look, the all-party groups there's 700 all-party groups, roughly, including such curious things as an all-party group for underground space, which I went to once, when you went under Leicester Square and you find the whole of central London's power from under Leicester Square. But that's a harmless bit of it. This is a serious issue in terms of abuse. It's not yet come out, and I speak as the person who filed the first ever Freedom of Information request about MPs' expenses many years ago. This is a problem. It's a problem for two reasons. First of all, MPs are behaving badly overseas, drinking too much, behaving in a way that doesn't credit Britain very much, because there are a lot of junkets, there are overseas junkets, quite frankly. The second problem with it, which isn't mentioned here, but I know about it, is that MPs are subject to attractive invites from dodgy regimes who want to improve their image in this country, and they get MPs on board to do that. So there is a desperate need, in my view, for all party groups to be better regulated, and this is picked up by Chris Bryant, the chairman of the Common Standards Committee, and apparently by the Prime Minister as well now.
And there are also dangers, aren't there, of blackmail down the line. I mean, if politicians get into compromising circumstances, it leaves them very vulnerable to blackmail.
Well, you had that story about Barry Gardiner, the Labour MP, of course, who had, I think he had, correct me if I'm wrong, Russian help in his office.
Beijing Barry, they used to call it.
Beijing was a Chinese. Either way, it was clearly inappropriate. And there is an opportunity, I think, to try to sort this out now, and Russia's going to be quite wise to try and grasp this by the by the nettle.
What do you make of this, Sophie? Kind of MPs behaving badly? Are you surprised?
No. I don't think we're surprised. I mean, luckily I'm a little bit older, so I didn't see the life before the expenses scandal. So it's all in politics. It's just everything I've ever saw is expensive scandals. Taking deals with dodgy PPE firms or Beijing Barry, for example. I just think there are a lot of politicians that will abuse the positions that they get in, and I don't actually think it's something that we're ever going to fix. I think it is just in the blood and the nature of being a politician.
You don't think we can ever clean up Westminster?
I don't think so. I think the type of person that becomes a politician and that can survive life in politics because it is extremely ruthless are unfortunately the type of people that behave in this way.
Well, I hope Norman wasn't subject to bribery when you were in office, were you, Norman?
I don't think I was worth bribing particularly, but look, I mean, the answer to this is freedom of information. That's absolutely the key to it, which is why I put that information request in about MPs' expenses. If people think they're going to be found out, they won't misbehave. It's as simple as that.
Yep. OK, so something we've been covering all morning, Sophie. There's been music to your ears, no doubt. Certainly GB News viewers are choosing Johnson over Sunak, and that's the result of a finding in today's Times, a poll coming out saying just that.
Yep, I'm not surprised. I maintained from when they were trying to get rid of Boris to when they eventually did that it would be categorically the worst decision that we have made, not only for this country but for our party. And consistently since then I've been proven right, and I'm still of the view that if Boris was in charge now, things would be better. And I do think that, yes, I acknowledge that he made some pretty foolish errors, but I think those things that he did wrong were relatively insignificant in compared to the challenge that we faced, but also the chaos and the carnage that needlessly came after it.
Now, there's a lot of people been getting in touch this morning on Twitter saying they very much support what you've been saying on here. You're a kind of card-bearing Conservative, you're out and proud, you're a working-class girl, you tick all the right boxes. Think about getting involved with the party? Think about standing as an MP?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as everybody knows, Margaret Thatcher is my biggest idol. I have a cardboard cutout of the woman and a custom-made blanket.
Oh, wow.
I've been a member of the Conservative Party since I was 15, so of course I want to get into politics. I want to make normal people, more working-class people, get into politics. But I do feel like, for now, that Sunak and the direction that this Conservative Party is going is not necessarily the direction that I would feel.
Sophie, it might be worth pointing out that even when it was Boris Johnson with Keir Starmer as leader of the opposition, he was still at some points ranking 20 points behind Keir Starmer. So perhaps either way, it looked as though Keir Starmer was ranking above the Tories in the polls at some point. But something about Boris Johnson is the way that he can command attention and can command headlines. I'm not sure there's any other politician. Like, even right now, if you go on Twitter, Boris Johnson is trending in the United Kingdom. And even when he flew back from the Caribbean to potentially take part in that leadership election against Rishi Sunak, I mean, there was a press gang on that plane with him. I mean, what is it about Boris Johnson that commands that?
I should say, by the way, just for clarity, I had a cardboard cutout of George Harrison rather than anything else. But no, I mean, look, Boris is a very attractive politician. People want to see him. You can imagine standing next to him in a pub and having a pint, that sort of thing, and therefore he's very popular in that way. But I think you have to bear in mind that the popularity is superficial to a large degree, and what he did in office was such behaviour that 50 or 60 ministers resigned in order to force him out. He only went out because all the ministers resigned. Yeah. That's why he had to go. You know, he was... That very fair report you had, by the way, your analysis of Boris's year was very fair, I thought, and also Peter Spencer's comments earlier on in the programme. You know, the man was, I'm afraid, an habitual liar. He was a narcissist. So whatever's attractive proposition Boris presented, he also had these negatives. He tried to suspend Parliament in order to get his votes through for months. Well, you know, you can't behave like that as Prime Minister.
Well, we've got balance on the show. That's good. Viewers out there think Boris can deliver. Norman, next to a story in the Express. The Royal Mail, however, can't deliver. What's going on here?
Martin, that's a lovely link, if I may say so.
Thank you very much.
No, this is quite a shocking story in the Express, who sent 200 letters from around the UK. And they're still waiting for 65 of them to be delivered. 31 first class.
They've tested it out by posting their own letters.
Yes. Yeah. And 1 in 3 hasn't been delivered, including 31 of them, which are first class, 34 of them are second class. And you have to wonder, actually, what's going on with the Royal Mail. I mean, I get a regular magazine, a transport magazine delivered to me, which I write for, which comes through the post, allegedly. I've got 2 issues missing from that. Where are they? You know, so, I mean, there's a whole lot of mail not being delivered.
Yeah, and the issue is, I mean, I've been speaking to lots of small businesses in recent weeks who have loyally supported Royal Mail. They support their posties, but ultimately they're small businesses. They want to get packages out to their customers. Well, they're going to go to different providers.
They are.
And they're going to go with the companies that can get their parcels to their customers. And is that the issue? Are Royal Mail actually pushing away those that were once loyal to them?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the issue, and I think the small business issue is a really important one, and it's what I was saying earlier about strikes as a whole. They do disproportionately impact those who run small businesses or who are working class people who often rely on those services. If you're a small business, we've got a lot of online brands now that are creating products that don't have physical brick and mortar stores, that rely on being able to post out their information, and those are the businesses that are getting unstuck again. So it's not the wealthy and the most elite people in the society, the ones that are suffering the least, while the normal people, again, suffer the most, unfortunately.
Sophie, staying with you, a subject close to your heart, because you went to Durham University, didn't you? You went to Durham Uni and you're a free speech advocate. Now, a Durham donor has cancelled their money to Durham over free speech. Is that right? What's going on there?
Yep, so this guy was Durham's largest donor. He donated over £7 million to my former university between up to 2021, but he then pulled out because he was appalled at the lack of free speech at Durham, which, as somebody who went to Durham, somebody who saw it with my own house, I mean, we had professors trying to be sacked. I mean, the amount of times I would be screamed at in the streets by students, I mean, groups of students.
Because of your political opinions?
Because of my political views. There was no such thing as free speech at Durham. It was a complete illusion, and our SU literally were against the free speech bill that was supposed to be coming in. They campaigned very much against it. So I'm really thankful for this guy for standing up and saying, you know what, no, this isn't it. Education is about freedom to learn, freedom to access knowledge and freedom of speech. And if you're not going to support that, then I'm not going to support you. And I really encourage a lot more donors to do the same thing, because it will uphold the integrity and the importance of education that we are now losing. So a lot of students.
It's interesting, I think, for people of my age, Norman, our age, to get young people to say, because we all think, universities are all woke, they're losing their minds, but it sounds like they are.
Well, universities, if you can't have free speech at universities, where can you have it, is the point. And I'm totally in favour of free speech, and people should be allowed to offend, actually. And what happens if you're free speech? I remember Nick Griffin, a rather nasty politician from the BNP, I think he was, went on to Question Time. A whole lot of people said, what's he doing on Question Time? He shouldn't be there. He destroyed himself.
The death of it.
He was destroyed by the audience and by the other panellists. Let people have their say. If they can't stand up to their arguments, then they'll suffer the consequence.
OK, sticking with something a bit more light-hearted, we talked about potentially the worst Christmas dinner, although I'm taken by the toast and the curry now. But Norman, moving on to the Express, the worst Christmas present.
Yeah, this is a nice little story here. Someone got a dustpan and brush for a Christmas present, which is a terrible thing to give, I think. Other than that, they were also given other presents, including out-of-date chocolate and wine and a used deodorant.
Oh, no. Yeah. That's awful.
There's nothing like saying, I don't love you, than giving somebody used deodorant.
No, you know what I think the worst gift is for Christmas? And, if you get this, they do not like you. Roses. 100%.
As in the chocolates and the flowers?
As in, the tins of roses. Okay. No one eats roses.
I love them.
No, come off it. Nobody eats roses. If you get a tin,
I love them.
If your neighbours give you roses of Quality Street, my friend, they do not like you.
Really?
They do not like you. I'm telling you, they do not like you.
I saw a meme this week, which I thought was quite funny, which is 2 words of warning ahead of Christmas, which was, do not give a woman something to clean the house with unless you're specifically asked for it, like a Hoover, for example.
Or a dustpan and brush.
Or a dustpan and brush. And if your wife or partner says she doesn't want anything, double and triple check, because usually she does. She just
so
I think that's very, very good advice. What's the worst present you've ever received? I can
probably
tell you mine.
Something made of meat, which I don't eat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you're vegetarian. Oh, that was a very bad idea.
Well, plus fish and chips.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mine was, I asked for a BlackBerry phone. This was years ago when BlackBerries were all the rage. And I got a box about this big from my mum, so it looked as though it could have been the phone. And it was a BlackBerry fruit, a physical piece, like a BlackBerry.
Was that
singular
her way?
BlackBerry.
Was that her way of taking the mickey, or did she actually think?
Well, I think she thought it was really funny, but I got quite teary. But I did actually get a BlackBerry phone as well, but she just gave me the piece of fruit first. So
one quick, serious story, if we could, because I'm really glad you covered this, Sophie. This idea of windfall taxes on energy companies as a way of kind of paying, balancing the books. Exxon, the petrochemical giant, is suing Brussels.
Yep, they basically are suing them because they believe that they do not have the authority to implement this levy. Now, this levy is supposed to be implemented on New Year's Eve, so December the 31st, and is essentially a 33% levy on any profits that go over 20% of their profits that they would have gotten between 2018 and before Russia invaded Ukraine, so 2018 to 2021. So it is, I controversially do think this is actually quite a good idea, because it's not a generic windfall tax where every single element of their profit is taken. It is any excess profit that they are making that they usually, before the invasion of Ukraine and the enormous increase in prices happened, 20% over that. So it's not what their usual profit is, it's anything that is extremely excessive where they are taking a bit of the mick. But I do think it's quite interesting that
I've got to say, I'm not surprised about this, because as somebody who was an MEP, and I listened to Ursula von der Leyen's inaugural speech when she made her bid for power, and it was abundantly clear from the word go that the European Union's plan was to tax the pips out of big companies to pay their bills. Norman, this is a concern, though, isn't it? Because if the big companies are kicking back and say, no, we're not going to take these taxes lying down, and this could be years of legal wrangling going on, is this the petrochemical giants kicking back and saying, no, we won't be taxed to death?
Well, they are saying that. Well, Exxon's saying it. Exxon is regarded as the most anti-environmental oil company of the lot. I mean, Shell and BP and others make an effort, but Exxon don't. Exxon, or Esso as sometimes branded, are regarded as very hostile. Look, Exxon makes billions of profits every year, so 25 billion windfall tax is actually only a small amount from their profit. So this is, in my view, rather necessary. There's a constitutional point here, actually, as to whether or not the European Union, or indeed the British government, or any other body, is able to introduce taxes that it wants to introduce. Why shouldn't it? So, irrespective of the merits of the tax, and I agree that it's probably a good idea, there's a constitutional point as to whether or not they're entitled to do so, and I think they are.
Norman, Sophie, you've been fantastic. That is time, but you're back, aren't you, in the next hour?
I think so, yeah.
One more round to go. Yep. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Now, the time has just gone 8:52. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories. And in the last few minutes, police say they've arrested a third individual in connection with the fatal shooting of Elle Edwards, who was killed outside a pub on Christmas Eve in Wirral. Merseyside police say a 31-year-old man has been arrested. A man and a woman have been arrested in connection with the incident.
And the government says there are no plans to introduce mandatory corona tests for visitors from China. This comes after China reportedly is experiencing an influx of cases since COVID restrictions have been eased. Other countries like the US have now imposed new measures for travellers from China after accusing them of a lack of information transparency.
A woman has been arrested on suspicion of neglect over an 8-year-old's death linked to Strep A in Wales. That's according to the BBC. The 33-year-old was taken into custody on the 23rd of December, but has been released as inquiries continue. The UK Health Security Agency data shows that 21 children under the age of 18 in England have died from infection, while 3 deaths of children have been recorded in Belfast and in Wales.
Pope Francis has asked for prayers for his predecessor, former Pope Benedict XVI, saying he is very sick. The Vatican says the 95-year-old had a sudden worsening of his health but is receiving constant medical care.
Well, the former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope in 600 years to resign when he stepped down in 2013. Well, we can speak now to Brendan Alejandro Thompson, who is CEO at Catholic Voices. Good morning to you, Brendan, and thanks so much for joining us. This is really concerning news for not only people at the Vatican, but for Catholics all around the world. What do we know about the health of Pope Benedict XVI? What do we know so far?
The answer is we don't know very much at the moment. So it took everyone by surprise that yesterday at his weekly general audience, Pope Francis asked for prayers. He said to pray for this faithful servant of the church who is sustaining the church with his prayers, and so we pray for him. And the Vatican media has been very tight-lipped up until now about the state of health of the former Pope, Pope Benedict XVI. And so at the moment, it's just it's a waiting game as to see what is going on with Pope Benedict. There are lots of reports and stories about what might be going on with his health, but now I think is a time really to pray for him and to reflect on his life and his legacy.
So for those, Brendan, who are watching and listening and perhaps aren't familiar with Pope Benedict, tell us about him as a person, and when he does eventually pass on, it may not be now, it could be in the future, what will his legacy be?
Yeah, so Pope Benedict XVI, who was born Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger, born in 1926, so actually he was a year younger than the Queen. And I think much like the Queen, he'll be remembered as a very dutiful Christian servant throughout his very, very long life and career under different circumstances and with very different challenges. I think ultimately his legacy, he won't be remembered as a great manager or as a great charismatic, kind of media personality, but he will be remembered as one of the foremost great Christian thinkers and teachers of our age. To have seen or to have read Benedict is to really have been profoundly moved by a man who was involved in some of the most seismic political and religious events of the last century.
Now, it's true to say that the two popes, Benedict and Francis, are great friends, aren't they? For the last 9 years, even after not being in the role, Benedict still lives within the Vatican. So they have a huge and close personal relationship as well, don't they?
Yeah, Pope Francis at times has referred to Benedict as like his grandfather, and he hasn't neglected in public to go and make visits to Santa Marta where he's staying. This is seen really as a kind of prayerful retreat. He hasn't taken a vow of silence by going in there, but has very much been praying through his suffering and also through various bits of writing, really contributing, as he has throughout his entire life in the church. And so it's no surprise that Pope Francis is really asking for prayers for this person that he truly admires.
Catholic, as CEO of Catholic Voices, how are you taking this news? Because despite his age, it has come as a shock to the Catholic community, hasn't it?
Sure, I remember the resignation way back in over a decade ago, nearly. And I remember being really shocked, as everyone was. I was profoundly, as a young Catholic, I was really shaped by Pope Benedict. I found him utterly inspiring. I think having grown up with this slightly God's Rottweiler image, I came to have the German Shepherd actually as the image. This kind of serene, intellectual man, and someone whose writing profoundly moved me personally in my faith, but also as someone who wanted to think seriously about Christianity. And I know for Catholics around the world, they're seriously praying. You know, it's not a great tragedy when somebody who's 95 dies, but really the prayers are to sustain him in this final part of his Christian journey, to have a beautiful death, you might say. So I know that there are loads of people who are talking about personal and less personal testimonies, but just want to reflect on the great contribution of this great churchman of our age.
Brendan, really moving words there to end our discussion this morning, and thoughts and prayers as well to the Catholic community, who I know have been really shocked by this news. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
OK, got plenty more to go through after the break, including the UK's response to COVID tests for Chinese visitors, so don't go anywhere. We'll see you after the break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The British government has said it has no plans to introduce travel restrictions on visitors from China as COVID rapidly spreads throughout the country.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of December. This is Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello in your final hour of this epic seasonal period and myself, Martin Daubney. Well, here's what's leading the news this morning.
Well, the UK will not reintroduce mandatory COVID tests for anyone arriving from China. That's despite the USA announcing that from the 5th of January, all Chinese arrivals will need to provide a negative COVID test before takeoff. It comes as UK Border Force staff begin the second in a series of strikes at UK airports until New Year's Eve.
Pope Francis has said that the former Pope Benedict XVI is very ill and he has asked pilgrims at the Vatican to pray for him. Benedict became the first leader of the Catholic Church to stand down in 600 years in 2013, citing advanced age.
And 2022 will be the warmest year on record for the United Kingdom. Aside from the summer peak, the Met Office said all 4 seasons in Britain this year were in the top 10 warmest since records began in 1884.
And please get in touch all the usual ways via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews and let us know where you're watching or listening from, so we'll give you a shout out. And it's been going mad this morning about Boris, summer weather and also comfort food at Christmas. So to our top story, the US has announced that all travellers from China must provide a negative COVID-19 test to enter the country, joining other nations such as Italy, imposing restrictions because of a surge in infections. However, the UK government has said it is not planning to follow suit.
Yes, the increase in cases across China follows the rollback of the nation's strict antivirus controls. Beijing's zero COVID policies had kept the country's infection rate low, but fueled public frustration and crushed economic growth. Well, let's get the view of political commentator Peter Spencer, who's been with us all morning, and he's been brilliant. So, Peter, tell us then, we've got Italy and the US now implementing testing for Chinese travellers. Perhaps some would say they had the right idea. There were flights into Milan in the past few days that had 52% of people on board positive with COVID. But the UK is saying, we're just going to keep calm and carry on. Is that the right approach, do you think?
Well, I suspect that that policy could change, and it could change at any moment. What's happening is that the situation is being monitored extremely carefully. And an interesting point from the American government is they say, look, one reason why we're cracking down on all this is that there's a lack of transparency from China. And the particular concern on stateside is whether there are variants which we don't know about and for which we don't necessarily have the appropriate treatment or even vaccines. For that reason, I suspect that if we find that there is any change to the situation and change in a negative sense, then I think that the government's response will be pretty rapid and pretty draconian.
So, Peter, some of the people who would like a more cautious approach are worried that this might escalate Britain towards some form of future lockdown. Now, you've got your ear to the ground. Surely the British government won't go down that route again, will it?
Not if it can possibly help it, because let's face it, I think the nation had a bit of a collective nervous breakdown over all that, with fear of going out, fear of missing out, and so on. And of course, all those people who couldn't get to visit relatives who were, alas, in the final stages of their life. So I think the government will be very, very anxious not to go there, which is why, although the policy now is officially that there will not be testing people coming in from China, why I think that situation could change, and it could change just like that.
Peter, should we turn to the strikes now? Because it's been strike season, hasn't it? But there's certainly a lot going on this week with Border Force, rail disruption and driving examiners out as we speak. But also it's in the papers as well, because the new boss at the TUC is saying that they're poised to boycott pay talks. There's talk of strikes deepening and intensifying in 2023.
Yes, although it's quite interesting. If you look at his quotes, he say these strikes may go on into 2023, which is a bit different from saying you better watch your step, Governor, because we're going to land one on you. And so I suspect that there is, I just had the feeling there's a little bit of steam being run out of here. And remember, you mentioned the border safeguards, for example, that actually generated minimal disruption within airports. Indeed, some people said actually we got through more quickly than we usually do. And I think there is a sense that people are getting to the idea of just learning to live with stuff going on. And there is, of course, remember, a huge disincentive from the point of view of people going out in strike to actually do that, which is quite simply the fact that they're not paid while they are out. That said, we have the nurses and the ambulance drivers who I think are really quite determined. And I suspect there will be some movement on the part of the government. Sunak is very keen to promote the idea that he isn't just some boring technocrat who's sort of fiddling away in Downing Street, but actually coming up with proactive ideas, putting himself on the front foot. The idea of his announcing, right, I'm going to have a thoroughgoing review of the NHS and we're going to sort out, iron out creases, and he could at the same time, parenthetically, improve the pay deal and or improve the conditions. Remember that nurses do get a hefty pension, but a pretty poor salary. We could find a situation where they adjust that a little bit, and so the budget remains the same, but they've got more in their pockets.
Well, Peter, the incoming General Secretary of the TUC, Paul Nowak, maybe should change his name to No Way, because he's saying that he will walk out of talks before he's even got in the job. Sounds like it could be a bit of a mini Mick Lynch. Surely that's the last thing the country wants, Peter.
The last thing the country wants, it's the last thing the government wants, and indeed, which is why there are plenty of people on the Tory backbenches who are saying, this is your Thatcher moment, you stand firm, see down the enemy within, which I think has got rather a neat irony to it when you consider the fact that ever since Sunak got into office, there had been a serial succession of backbench rebellions. Well, how's that for setting example? Not much, I don't think.
Peter, let's talk about the spate of violence that's taken place over this festive period. 26-year-old Elle Edwards was shot dead in a pub on Christmas Eve when she was celebrating with her sister and her friends. And on Boxing Day, another man in his 20s, Cody Fisher, was stabbed at a club in Birmingham. Rishi Sunak has responded to this, pledging to make Britain's streets safer. So how is he going to do that?
Well, that's a very good question. And I note that story about Rishi Sunak's line in this came from the Daily Express, which has always been a cheerleader for the right. And we didn't actually get a statement from Rishi Sunak. What we got was one of the hacks at the Express ringing Number 10 and saying, yeah, what about all this crime stuff? And to which the standard response was, well, we wish to make our streets safer. And well, of course he does, but that doesn't change any kind of policy. I mean, interestingly, I think this comes on the back of the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, saying that making a big deal about the fact that he wishes to crack down on crime, particularly antisocial behaviour, reprising, if you like, Tony Blair's tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. In fact, interestingly, I do remember around that time when he came up with that announcement, an environment minister, the Environment Department was announcing it was going to try to do its best to tidy up Britain's rather untidy streets. And this Environment Minister said to me, ever so proud of himself, and said, guess what? We're going to be tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. How about that for a line?
OK, Peter Spencer, one final question, the question on everyone's lips. Was that kitten your idea or was it your wife's idea?
Kitten? Well, let me see now. Actually, immediately behind me, there is the copy of my latest novel, Trudy's Tricks. Which is...
Here we go. OK, well, I think that means it was his wife.
Why not? For heaven's sake, a bit of product placement never did anybody any harm, did it?
I love it. Product placement early in the morning on The Breakfast Show. Peter Spencer, delight to have you on with us, as always. That was political commentator Peter Spencer. In his very pink kitchen.
Very pink.
Now, this morning, Ukraine has reported suffering a new wave of missile strikes from air and sea, with the presidential advisor saying more than 120 warheads had been launched.
The attack comes after the former head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannett, exclusively told GB News that Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals unless Russia manages to turn the war in its favour.
For the better part of a year, Ukraine has been under relentless Russian bombardment. From missile strikes to tank and artillery fire, as Russian forces push to consolidate their gains. But in recent months, against seemingly insurmountable odds, the Ukrainians have been pushing back. A counter-offensive, making key gains. Chief among them, recapturing the strategically important southern city of Kherson. The former head of the British Army believes if Ukraine can keep up that momentum in the months ahead, then the Russian president could find it increasingly difficult to cling on to power.
I could see a set of circumstances where the Russian military's morale would collapse. When you've lost the will to win, when you've decided that you're defeated in your own head, then you will lose. And of course, if that was to happen, that's a game changer. I think we would see a change of regime in the Kremlin. I think we would see Putin out.
There's no doubting the bravery and resolve of the Ukrainians, but it's sophisticated Western-supplied weapon systems that's helped give them the edge in many of their encounters with Russian forces. Lord Dannett says it's absolutely vital that the US in particular stands firm in its support of Ukraine.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
Also key is the continuation of the training of Ukrainian volunteers, particularly by Britain and Poland.
Yeah, so I'm going to place the TMH at the front. I'm going to ensure that the pins, are pulled out as we previously did, yeah?
Around 10,000 Ukrainians are being trained in the UK before returning home to take up the fight. In the months ahead, Ukraine has to keep up the momentum and continue making gains in its counter-offensive. Its stated aim to push Russia out of all Ukrainian territory. Defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford believes recapturing Crimea would guarantee their victory.
He or she who controls the Crimea or holds the Crimea basically controls the Black Sea and the entrance to the Sea of Azov. If the Ukrainians manage to take Crimea, that might be the point at which they are prepared to negotiate for peace.
In recent months, Russia has stepped up its strikes on key civilian infrastructure, heaping even more misery on Ukraine's population. Sadly, it is a grim pattern. The more military success Ukraine enjoys on the battlefield, the more its beleaguered towns and cities will suffer the effects of increased Russian bombardment. Mark White, GB News.
Well, it's just coming up to 9:15. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories. And police say they have arrested a third individual in connection with the fatal shooting of Elle Edwards, who was killed outside a pub on Christmas Eve in Wirral. Merseyside police say a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. A man and a woman have also been arrested in connection with the incident.
The Labour Party wants to update Tony Blair's tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime slogan. The party will focus on the prevention of crime by tackling the effects of trauma that could lead to people to offend. This could mean victims of antisocial behaviour potentially determine how offenders themselves are punished.
The deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 60 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will bring spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. It's issued a yellow alert for heavy rain for much of Scotland on Friday, warning of flooding and travel disruption too. Now, we're talking about lots of things this morning, including your favourite comfort food, because there is something, was it in the Express?
It's in the Daily Mirror, page 3. Yeah, the top 20 comfort foods in the nation. Top of the pile, your favourite was roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, the choice of a quarter of the British population, followed by apple, crumble and custard for pudding. So very traditional favourites at the top, although we have a continental interloper, pizza margherita at number 3. With 22%. I do like a margarita,
yeah,
gotta say.
And you like your turkey dinner as well. That was your comfort food.
Yeah.
We had Aidan McGee on earlier, our sports correspondent, and he was saying that his favourite comfort food is cheese on toast. DJ Jacko's been in touch on Twitter saying, morning, Aidan McGee, cheese on toast. Question is, with or without Worcester sauce?
I would say always with. A little drizzle, not too much. Don't overpower it. Twist the pepper, tart it up a bit. Bang on.
No, I think a little bit of chutney. If you're going to put anything on cheese on toast.
A cavalier choice.
A little bit of chutney.
Yeah,
that's the way forward.
I like
Well, let us know what your favourite comfort food is. Is it a roast? Is it something else? GBViews@gbnews.uk. We're also talking about Boris Johnson. Could we see a comeback in 2023? Is 2023 the right time for a comeback, if at all? GBViews@gbnews.uk.
OK. Well, they're tasked with putting themselves in danger to protect all of us, but according to a new report, firefighters are being paid up to 6 times less than the top brass.
Yes, chief fire officers are paid up to £206,000, whilst many ordinary firefighters face in-work poverty. That's according to a Fire Bridges Union report. The revelations come amid a historic strike ballot after a 5% pay rise was rejected.
Well, we can now speak to a friend of the channel and an excellent commentator on Labour and the working classes, firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embury. Good morning to you, Paul. So tell us about this huge disparity of pay within people working, the top brass versus the rank and file worker.
Yeah, hi Martin, hi Ali. It stems from research, as you say, that has been carried out by the Fire Brigades Union, which shows that the average salary for a chief fire officer is something in the region of £148,000, which is not far shy, actually, of the Prime Minister's salary. So I think it's reasonable to ask whether or not chief officers, and of course they're important people, nobody disputes that, but whether they should be earning that level of salary, particularly in the context of the ongoing pressure on wages of ordinary firefighters. Ordinary firefighters on the front line have seen their real terms wages fall by something like £4,000 over the last decade. And that's why the Fire Brigades Union is balloting for strike action at the moment, because we've got thousands of firefighters up and down the country who really are struggling to make ends meet. They're worried about paying their energy bills, worried about paying their mortgages. And I think this research just highlights some of the real critical issues over pay in the fire service.
So, Paul, is the answer to this less middle management, like we often talk about on this show in the NHS? So less middle management, more kind of rank and file workers, more pay for the rank and file workers, or a bit of both?
I think in any walk of life, in any industry, if you have huge disparities between the people at the top of the organisation and the people at the bottom, then frankly it breeds resentment. And the fire service is no different to any commercial organisation in that respect. I mean, a firefighter at the moment, Martin, a trainee firefighter joining the fire service would earn something like £11 an hour, which is just £1.50 more, £1.55 I think it is more. Than the national minimum wage. And you have to ask yourself, is it acceptable for people who put themselves in harm's way, in protection of the public, risk their lives on a daily basis, to receive that kind of level of pay? And firefighters are very angry, which is why there's a strike ballot taking place, because we constantly get pats on the back from politicians saying what a great job we do. But when it comes to actually funding a decent pay increase during a cost of living crisis, they look the other way. And that's simply isn't acceptable.
I wonder, Paul, moving on from this into the broader terms of, do you think the government takes advantage of people's good nature? We see so often, don't we, that people who want to work in nursing, the caring professions, or they don't get into it for the money, they get into it because they want to. Same with firefighting. Isn't there just a huge disparity between what we pay people who endanger themselves versus the private sector? We really undervalue public sector workers like firefighters and like nurses in general.
Well, I mean, speaking for my colleagues, yes, they certainly sense that. They sense that their goodwill is often abused. As I said, you know, in my industry and in every other emergency service, people are willing to put themselves in harm's way in the protection of the public. And the contract should be, look, we're prepared to do that. Government should be prepared to make sure there's sufficient funding to give those people a decent pay increase. And I have to say, Martin, it's not just the issue of pay. It's the issue of the very savage cuts that have taken place in recent years. In the fire service, for example, over the last decade, we've lost something in the region of 1 in 5 firefighter posts. We've seen literally dozens of fire stations closed, hundreds of fire engines taken out of action. So firefighters are constantly being expected to perform their role with one hand tied behind their back. That's what's contributed to the really low morale at the moment, and that's why the strike pilot is taking place. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be a yes vote in January.
Now, Paul, one final thing. I've read your book, Despise Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class. Excellent book. You, of course, come from the Labour left, but you voted Brexit. You've seen how the working class communities would change, how people moved out of areas in London into the coast. Despite all of that, are you still sticking with the Labour Party, or are you ever tempted to change? Because I'm just really curious personally.
Well, thanks for the plug for the book, first of all. I have to say, I mean, I'm not particularly tempted to change. I mean, for me, history shows that the vast majority of advances that have been won by working class people in this country have come about as a result of campaigning by the Labour movement, the Labour Party and the trade unions together. Now, as you know, Martin, I'm certainly not uncritical of the modern Labour Party. I think many of its wounds are entirely self-inflicted, particularly the schism with ordinary working class communities. But I've still got faith in it as a vehicle which can achieve good things for working class people. So I'm a bit of a museum piece in the Labour movement these days, as you probably know, but I'll carry on fighting within it.
Paul Embry, really good to have you on the programme this morning. Thanks so much for your time. I think he makes a really good point there, because I was speaking to some nurses last week outside St Thomas's Hospital, and they were saying that, you know, it's not just about pay, it's about care. And like you said, they're the kind of people that aren't doing it for the pay. They're doing it as a vocation, but they're actually worried about the care that they can give to patients. They don't feel like they're giving what those patients deserve. And it'll be interesting to see if they do ballot for strike action, what the public support would be for firefighters, because they are people who put their lives on the line to keep us safe.
Probably very high, especially post-Grenfell. You know, they're really in the limelight there. And I do think there's a solid argument for people's goodwill in the caring professions being underpaid and undervalued. I do. And maybe we're starting to soften on this. You know, maybe we should just pay these people more and get them back to work. Yeah, not even just about pay. It's working conditions as well, and the jobs they do are so important to keep us all safe. Now, let's talk about Boris Johnson, shall we? Because the former Prime Minister presided over our country during a global pandemic and a war in Europe. But earlier this year, Conservative MPs decided he'd become an electoral liability, and he was replaced with Liz Truss. Yet in a new poll of Conservative members, Boris remains more popular than current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Our political reporter Catherine Forster takes a look back over Boris Johnson's tumultuous 2022.
Just 2 years earlier, Johnson had won an 80-seat majority on his promise to get Brexit done. But 2022 began badly. The latest Partygate revelation was the most shocking yet. Number 10 staff had partied with suitcases of wine the night before the Queen sat alone at Prince Philip's funeral. The Prime Minister apologised to Her Majesty for the behaviour of his staff. Tory grandee David Davis was scathing.
You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Partygate took a back seat when Russia invaded Ukraine in February, and Johnson led the West's response in offering strong support to Volodymyr Zelensky.
How are you?
In Ukraine, the beleaguered British Prime Minister became a hero. Back home, in April, he was fined by police for breaking lockdown rules by attending a brief birthday gathering in June 2020.
Today, I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police. Let me say immediately that I've paid the fine and I once again offer a full apology.
In May, Sue Gray's long-awaited report into lockdown gatherings was finally published. It was damning. The Conservatives did terribly in local elections and lost by-elections both to Labour and the Lib Dems. Many Tory MPs had had enough. A confidence vote followed on the 6th of June.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
An uneasy truce ensued until Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher was suspended for sexual misconduct, and Downing Street's ever-changing recollections of what Johnson had known and when became too much for MPs to bear. Health Secretary Sajid Javid resigned first, followed minutes later by Chancellor Rishi Sunak. The following day, ministers resigned faster than Johnson could replace them. On July the 7th, he admitted defeat.
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
He channeled Arnold Schwarzenegger in his final PMQs.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Come September, he met the Queen and in his final speech obliquely hinted at a possible return.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
Cincinnatus was a Roman general who returned to office in his country's hour of need. Later, Liz Truss's premiership had imploded and the Conservative Party needed another leader fast. It couldn't be Johnson, could it? As the calls to bring back Boris grew, he raced back from his Caribbean holiday and hit the phones. He and the favourite Sunak met, but on the Sunday night, Johnson announced it was not the right time and withdrew. Since then, he's joined rebellions on onshore wind and says he will fight the next election. Johnson has made over £1 million for just 4 speeches. Analysts say he could make £5 million a year. Some comfort, perhaps, for the man who wanted to be world king. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Lots of you getting in touch on Boris. We're going to share some throughout the rest of the programme, but I'll bring you one now, which is Malcolm, who says Boris, for all his faults, was a leader and, dare I say, a statesman. You may not excuse Partygate or his failure to appoint a perfect deputy whip, but all this pales into insignificance when compared to his leadership and supporting Ukraine and his leadership when COVID struck as well. Well, thank you, Malcolm, for your views. We've got loads more that we're going to bring you after this short break, so do stay with us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning and welcome back. The time's just gone 31 minutes past 9. You are watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Costello and Martin Daubney.
It's been a very lively show and it's your final furlong and you're free. So still to come on today's programme. Could 2022 be the warmest year on record? That's provisional data coming from the Met Office. Will be live from the headquarters later on in Exeter.
Oh, you're going to have to help me with this one. Erling Haaland.
Erling Haaland, you got it.
Yeah, there you go. As Man City's Erling Haaland breaks another record following a comfortable win last night away at Leeds. We will have all the latest sports news with Aidan McGee. Thank goodness, not me.
Who's very perfumed this morning. And as ever, please do get in touch. You can join in any of our discussions by emailing GBViews at GB News or, of course, tweet us at GB News. Please get in touch. Well, it's that time of year because every year the New Year's Honours List recognises and celebrates the achievements and services of people across Britain and indeed globally who have excelled in some positive way to the benefit of others.
Yes, this December will see the first New Year's Honours List under the reign of King Charles III. It's put together by 9 specialist committees, such as Health and Business. It's then approved by the Prime Minister before being rubber-stamped by Buckingham Palace. And the list is also an opportunity for members of the public to nominate the brilliant people around them.
Well, joining us now is Leslie Hussell, who is an awards and honours expert. So, Leslie, any sort of inside information about the types of people who might get a gong this year?
Yeah, morning, Ellie. Morning, Martin. Do you know, I absolutely love the New Year's Honours List because it just extends the joy of Christmas that little bit further. It's recognising amazing people and really showcasing the best of Britain. And the celebs will get the headlines, but we're expecting more than 1,000 people to be on the list. And there will be so many ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
And there is a conversation, isn't there, about whether we should update the honours list. And there are rumours of King Charles III making possible changes, perhaps from the word empire to excellence. But that would also change OBEs and CBEs, would it not? Do you think that the honours system needs to be modernised, perhaps updated?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first point is that there is absolutely no indication that King Charles wants to abolish the honour system. He's been running investitures for many years on behalf of his mother, the late Queen. 50 years ago, you know, it was an honours list that could have been criticised as male and pale and stale. But really now, I think it does represent really great facets of our very diverse country. The last list in June, 51% women and 14% people from ethnic minority backgrounds. Now that can rise. And I think the most important point is, and often this is not known, but members of the public can nominate people who they think are worthy of appearing on the list. It's not a closed and secretive process. You can go on to the gov.uk website and download a form and fill it in and put forward to be considered somebody you think deserves to be on that list. And here at Awards Intelligence, we'll be very happy to give you an assessment, honest, free of charge, about their chances. But, you know, you have to be in it to win it. So if you know somebody you think has done great things in charity or business or the community, put their name forward.
OK, Leslie, we don't know the details yet, but if you had to nominate one person for a gong, who would that be?
OK, I've got 2 or 3 I'm going to mention. One, the astonishing 8-year-old Tony Hudgell, whose legs were amputated when he was a baby after he was viciously attacked by his parents. He then went on, inspired by Captain Tom, to walk 10 kilometres on prosthetic limbs, and he raised £1.7 million for the Evelina London Children's Charity Hospital. And then this year, Tony's Law, inspired by him, has really increased the penalties for those who are convicted of child abuse and neglect. So what an absolute hero.
Oh,
now,
nice.
talking about heroes, the Lionesses,
Yeah, you
the
said
England women's football team who won the Euros. So Beth Mead, sports personality of the year, Leah Williamson, captain, Serena Wigman, the coach.
Yeah.
Why not actually give a gong to the entire team? And
Yeah,
I just
Leslie, I totally agree with you. Just before you came on, we were talking about who we'd like to see on the list, and I said the Lionesses have got to be there. So thank you for mentioning them. Leslie Hustle, really good to speak to you. That's Leslie Hustle, an awards and honours expert, taking us through what we're expecting to see on the New Year's honours list. Let us know who you would like to see on the list. Who do you think should get a gong this year? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Who'd be on your list?
I'd like to see young Jude Bellingham get there. I know he's a young lad, but he's got a massive future ahead of him. You know, let's give the next generation a bit of rocket fuel. Anyhow, you're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Ellie Martin, Martin Daubney and Ellie. Plenty more to come in the final half of our programme. Can't you tell we need some more coffee? Going through the headlines very shortly. And 2022 is set to be the UK's warmest year on record. All that's come after a quick break. I need more coffee.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us. We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 10. You are watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News.
Well, it's time to go through the papers now. Joining us for the final and fourth round, former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker and a political commentator, Sophie Corcoran. Sophie, lots and lots of people have been sending hugely positive views in what you've been saying today. And, of course, you, Norman.
I love you as well, Norman.
Yeah, love you too, Norman. Don't you worry about that, my old son. And let's start with you, Norman, to prove that we love you. Strikes and more strikes. Oh, my God, the strikes are going to intensify as more workers are balloted according to the I newspaper.
More strikes than we've got at the moment, because next year we're going to have the TUC threatening not to participate in these independent pay reviews on the basis that over the last 15 years, they say, the TUC says, that average workers have lost £20,000 in real wages since 2008. So they want to boycott these independent peer reviews, which of course the government's been leaning on those to say, well, this is a very fair deal for the nurses and so on, because some independent peer review body that reported sometime in the past has said this is an appropriate figure. Yeah. And of course it's no longer the appropriate figure because inflation's taken off and everything else. So we're in for more strikes, and I really think the government's going to get a grip on this one. And the way to get a grip on it is actually to old-fashioned sit down with, dare I say, beer and sandwiches to try and get some resolution. Because if they bring in anti-union legislation, which we've got the most anti-union legislation of anywhere in Europe, actually.
Now, earlier on, Norman, you said it wasn't like the 1970s. Now you're saying beer and sandwiches. So
well, that is true. Beer and sandwiches, 1970s, yeah.
Sophie, I want to quickly come to you. Would you agree, though, that the longer the strikes go on, the more pay the workers are losing? So if you ballot them, aren't they less likely to keep voting for strikes because they're out of pocket?
Yeah, and I think Rishi Sunak made very clear in the way that he was dealing with the strikes that he would not settle for double-figure pay deals, which I think is entirely reasonable. Yes, I think it's bold for us to be sitting here on this breakfast bench and talking about people who are working hard and who are suffering for the cost of living crisis. But ultimately, the more you draw out the pain, the longer it's going to last, the longer that's then going to fall on my generation, which I don't think is particularly fair. So I think he is taking a very sensible approach to not give in to unreasonable demands of double-figure pay raises that are just not realistic in any sense, and waiting them out, because I do think that the longer it goes on, the less people will be able to go and strike.
Story here. A lot of love for Boris Johnson on the show today. This one, though, might stick in the craw. So if you're one of yours, the COVID inquiry rumbles on. The taxpayer is funding Boris Johnson's legal fees.
Both Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, in actual fact, because they are both core participants in the inquiry. That doesn't, of course, mean that they have any wrongdoing. It's just because of their positions as the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary in the inquiry. But it does raise a question, though. Mr Matt Hancock just made £400,000 in the jungle. Is it right for him to be having the taxpayer pay his legal fees, as well as Boris Johnson, who has made millions of pounds doing after-dinner speeches once his tenure is gone? Do they need the taxpayer to pay his fees? No. In my opinion, they don't.
Norman, quick word on that.
Well, I agree with Sophie on that. I mean, they were both
you two are very agreeable this morning.
They were both not everything, but they were both found guilty of offences during lockdown. I mean, in a way, they should be responsible for their own actions and fund their own defences. They need to.
Norman, let's have a look at a health story in The Guardian. And dementia patients and their families are warning of a horrific crisis in care homes.
Yes, this is a horrific story, actually, and this is the Care Commission, independent regulator of the care sector, which said that now 1 in 11 care homes are way below acceptable standards, and another 39% or thereabouts have got improvements required of them. So half the care homes in the country are below standard, which is really quite shocking. And they talk about residence dressings going unchanged for 20 days, revolting filthy carpets, unexplained and unwitnessed wounds, equipment encrusted with dirt, and so on. This is shocking, and it's partly because I think that there's no money in the care sector. People aren't being paid very well. There's a shortage of staff. Councils are paying nothing very much for the bed places. But, you know, this isn't just about care homes, serious though it is. It's about the whole health service, because the reason we've got ambulance queues outside our A&E departments is because people aren't being discharged into care homes.
Would you like to see, to both of you, as a Foreign Minister first yourself, a return to care being brought under state control? So social care for the elderly under state control, so it's not let out to the private sector. Could that be a potential solution?
No, well, I don't think so particularly. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the private sector being involved, but it's a question of how, if they're properly regulated, which they are, but they're not delivering. But I don't think it's a question of state control. You could have equally council-run premises which are below standard, I think.
Yeah, Soph?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much of the same view on that, to be honest with you. I think we need to start holding people more accountable. That is where the ultimate issue lies. We are not holding people accountable when we should be.
Sophie, should we return to a theme that we know you're very passionate about, which is free speech in education? This story in The Times that Tennyson is offensive. That's what students are being told.
Yep, so it's another of this mission of this whole idea of decolonising the curriculum. It was something that was very strong when I was at Durham. It's a very key theme in my new university that I'm at now. And it's basically the fact that we should just discard anything positive that any white people have done. So if a white person is a notable academic, they have great views or they've done great things notable in history, that is no longer significant and they should be removed from the curriculum because they are white, which of course is deeply unprogressive, rather racist in a sense, and diminishes the education that students are receiving, which is negative in all aspects.
I'm sure, Norman, you would concur that being at university is a time to be exposed to ideas that you find uncomfortable.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned earlier on, Nick Griffith on Question Time, who would like to say what he wants to say, destroyed himself as a consequence of that. And so free speech is very important. Let people say what they want to say, and let's challenge them democratically if we don't agree with them.
And there's a list of phrases out this week that were deemed offensive. Trigger warning. The phrase to say something might offend you in itself is offensive, because if you know something's going to trigger you, people are triggered. Sophie, will this madness ever end, or is it just here to stay?
Hang on a minute. So I need a trigger warning on a trigger warning on a trigger warning. Is that?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that about
it's
sums it up.
just nonsense. It's just words, guys. They're not going to hurt you. Get over it. My generation, that's what happened.
The other thing is tennis and everything else. These are people from the past, and you have to actually assess paintings or works of art or literature based on the time in which it occurred. I mean, quite clearly the slave trade was grotesque and horrible, but at the time it wasn't seen that way. So the motivation of people is the important point. Do people think they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing? And that's how they should be judged. Not by judgment centuries on.
We can all agree on that. Norman Baker, Sophie Corcoran, been superb.
Yes,
Divergent opinions, but you've disagreed politely. Isn't that the way to go? Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you
very much.
Just very quickly bring you some views on Boris Johnson. We'll be talking about a potential comeback in 2023, if not beyond. Lots of love for Boris Johnson, it's fair to say, in the GB Views. Kevin says, we voted for Boris as PM and PM only. We wanted an innovator, not an imitator. We will not be voting for the Conservatives again without him as leader. He's a cheerleader for the UK.
I've had to look through them, but I have found a negative view on Boris, one from Richard. Boris had his chance. He's been a complete letdown in office. He didn't get Brexit done properly, unwanted green agenda. He increased immigration. He's a Liberal, Norman, and not a Tory. We don't want Boris back, says Richard.
With that point anyway.
I'm sure you would.
And Margaret says, well, I always said that the Tories would regret ousting Boris. The party has suffered dramatically since he was stabbed in the back by his so-called colleagues. He should still be our PM. And a quick one from Linda, who says, yes, bring Boris back sooner rather than later. So do keep that coming in. There's loads of views on Boris Johnson. He's a man that still gets us talking, doesn't he? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Now, 2022 will be the UK's warmest year on record, as the Met Office says figures show the climate crisis is having a real impact. The Met Office said the annual average temperature across the UK this year would exceed the previous record set in 2014.
Well, we're joined now by a South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody, for more. Morning, Jeff. So, it's been a bit of a balmy year, but is it climate change or has it just been warm?
Well, it's certainly not balmy now. I can tell you that for nothing. It's very cold here in Exeter, outside the Met Office. But they're telling us now that it's been the hottest year on record. They're saying that every single month this year, apart from December, no surprises there, has been hotter than it has been before since records began. Well, they've been making records here at the Met Office since the early 1800s, and they've actually been recording temperatures in England right back to the early 1600s. So they've got quite a few references to look through. But yes, in a couple of days' time, they're due to say to us that it's been the hottest year ever on record. Is it climate change, you ask, or is it just weather? That's the big question, isn't it? Well, the Met Office is pointing us towards one statistic. They're saying that the top 10 hottest years ever on record have been in the last 20 years. So they're saying the figures speak for themselves. The National Trust have got involved. They're saying, yes, it's most definitely climate change. They're saying that everything is changing and that we should expect much, much hotter summers. We should expect much, much colder and wetter winters, and that things will be changing, and we need to be looking at how we plant things, how we look after nature a lot more. We can now no longer guarantee that we should plant things at certain times of the year, as our gardening books tell us. We should be looking instead at what's happening in the climate and plant things at different times of the year. That's what they're saying. But the Met Office is also keen to say that this doesn't necessarily mean that every single year from now on will be hotter in the summer and wetter in the winter. They're saying that it's the general overall pattern that seems to be changing. Having said that, they have got two predictions for us, which I'd like to bring to you. The first prediction is that the beast from the east is due to make a dramatic return in January. We're expecting expecting much colder. We're expecting a lot more snow again. I'm looking forward to being snowed in again. But they're also saying that 2023, I don't know how they can tell this early, but 2023 is set to be even hotter than 2022. I wish it would hurry up and start. It's cold here.
Oh, Jeff, well, thank you for bringing us that update that the UK was the warmest year on record, but from a not very balmy Exeter. Go get a cup of tea or something, Jeff. Go warm up. We appreciate you being with us. Thanks so much.
Now, it's that time in the morning. You can smell him before you can see him. And I say that in a good way. Aidan McGee here with the sports. She's very perfectly perfumed this morning.
Yeah. That's why it's favourite, as Patrick was going to say. Are we allowed to say what it is?
No,
don't do that. We won't say that. We'll keep it a mystery.
You can smell it. You can... Right.
Yeah.
You're going to buy some this afternoon, you say, yeah?
That's on my shopping list. I'll get myself a New Year's late Christmas present. So anyway, back to the sport.
Yeah.
Let's do some work, shall we?
Yeah, Man City was smelling good last night, I'll tell you, because they were out of action for 5 weeks. Well, no, they'd had a cup game, but Erling Haaland had been sitting at home for 5 weeks. Norway international, didn't go to the World Cup, but he was absolutely raring to go last night, and he came out of the blocks, hit his straps early, 2 goals in the second half. That was enough to win the game for them, and he's the first player in Premier League history to have hit 20 goals in, this early in the season. If you think about it, had there been no World Cup, he probably would have hit that sometime in mid-November. So and given that that's 20 goals with 17 from open play, 3 from penalties, that's an extraordinary output at any level. And yes, you can say they've got Gundogan, they've got Grealish, they've got other players around feeding him. He gets the best service you can possibly get. But the hardest thing in football, Martin, is to put the ball in the net, and that's exactly what he did. So that leaves them in second place, ahead of Newcastle, 5 points behind Arsenal, ominously. And I think they're just raring to go now. They're going to have the squad. They're the ones who are going to have to manage this fixture backlog. We haven't even considered weather in January and February. You know, we might have some snow, we might have some inclement weather, which means that we'll get further backlogs. It's going to be the teams with the big squads who are going to be able to deal with it. And that's why, if we're going to lead us into the transfers, Arsenal may be dipping into the transfer window this month.
Now, I know I talk about Nottingham Forest perhaps a bit too much on this show, but I think we've only got 1 year.
It's not the end of the world, though.
Could Mystic McGee give me a bit of hope? I mean, do you think teams like Forest can avoid the drop, or is it just going to be too tough?
It's not maybe, but it's not the end of the world if they don't. Now they sacked two of their transfer negotiators because it's not a good thing bringing in 20 new players at the start of the season. I mean, what does that say to the squad that got you up? It's basically destroying the fabric of the dressing room. When you get those players in, you're then saying they're not coming in for less money than the guys who got you up. They're going to be on more. So it generates a 2-tier system in the dressing room and generates resentment. I don't think that's a good thing to do. They've realised their mistakes. Listen, if they spend 1 year in the Premier League and they finish bottom of the league, and there's no saying they'll finish bottom anyway, but they walk away with about £110 million. It makes you so strong in the Championship that the chances are you then come back up. Even if you do a Norwich and Fulham are going to stay up this season, but they did it having gone up twice and relegated twice in embarrassing circumstances. But you take the money every time, and it loads you up financially. Arsene Wenger used to call it financial doping. That's exactly what he meant. He was talking about sides having too much money in the league below, and eventually you settle in the Premier League. There is no reason Nottingham Forest, in the size of the club they are, should not be in the Premier League long term. When they went down in 1999, I said they'll be back in a year. It took them 21. It was incredible.
I remember it well. It's one of the most depressing days of my life, but you give me some hope anyway. Thank you very much for that.
Should we talk about transfer gossip? What are you hearing?
Yeah, look, Cody Gakpo has sealed that move to Liverpool. They did not mess around. The window isn't even open, and he's a Dutch international, scored 3 times at the World Cup. They were quick to picture him at Melwood yesterday at the training ground with Virgil van Dijk, his compatriot. They reckon he had a big hand in getting him to Liverpool. Liverpool quite clever using their players, using their star players to entice players in to the club. £44 million it could rise to. He's 23 years old. He's certainly one for the future, and he's going to be eased into the team as well. Well, he plays off the left, and I think he could be a good one for the future.
I know it's not on your list, but I want to talk about Jude Bellingham.
Yes.
Because he's the guy that must be able to name his own price now. Now, Liverpool, Henderson making overtures. Where do you think he will end up? Because, I mean, this guy, he's got a huge future ahead of him.
I saw him play for Birmingham probably about 3 years ago, I think it was. I think I met his dad as well. His dad's a copper. Lives up in, came from a really solid family. He's got a younger brother who's pretty good as well. I think he will end up at Liverpool, actually. Chelsea are going to be strong in for him, but I think if they get Declan Rice, they'll be happy with that. They're also in for this guy, Enzo Fernandez, Argentinian player, £105 million. That would break the transfer record they paid for Romelu Lukaku about 18 months ago.
What kind of dosh do you reckon you'll be looking at for Bellingham now?
Bellingham, I think... It's crazy. I mean, I've been saying for years it's got to stop somehow. This merry-go-round or this whatever you want to call it, this got to stop at some point. But it doesn't. It just gets bigger and bigger. The TV deal gets bigger every 3.5, 4 years with Sky. I think you could be. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a deal, possibly not front-loaded, but you could see a deal that possibly results in the buying team paying about up £150 million.
Crikey.
Wow.
You know.
We've just got a moment to talk about Djokovic.
Yeah.
In Australia.
Yeah, he is. He's landed in Adelaide. Who'd have thought that this time last year? He was banned for 3 years. They've overturned his the visa issue that he had, and they've allowed him in, and good as well, because showed last year he's a man of principle, and that cost him last year because he relinquished a Grand Slam. I think he would have won that tournament.
So do I.
In fact, the final was a decent final. Medvedev showed how brittle he was, and he was overcome by Nadal. But I think that Djokovic in that tournament would have prevailed. So he's back in there this time. He's not sure the reception he'll get, Martin, because he's not half as arrogant as people think he is. He's actually quite a humble individual. I've interviewed him many times, and a friend of mine was in a cafe in Monaco. He gave him a nice selfie, so he'd always have kudos for that. So I think he's not guaranteed, or he's not as certain of the reception he'll get. I think the tennis supporting public in Melbourne will realise that this guy's won 9 tournaments there. He takes the Australian Open very, very seriously. Yes, it was a point of principle last year, but let's welcome him back because tennis is stronger for him in it.
Principle is something that's quite rare in sport these days, but thanks for your input this morning, and thanks for the pong. That's definitely, I'm getting myself some of that in a bit. Aidan McGee,
Honestly.
legend.
Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you so much. We've just got a minute left on the programme, so I'm going to bring you some of the GB views because there's been so many, and thank you so much for getting in touch with us. We were talking about firefighter pay earlier. They're being balloted at the moment, potentially going on strike next year. Sean's been in touch saying, who would you pay more, a paper pen pusher or a firefighter pulling your loved ones out of a burning building? Same with all protectors. Our compassion, care and dedication has long been abused, and you wonder why they decide they want to go on strike now.
I think we'll all agree on that. And a quick couple of points on comfort food. Ken says, can I suggest Cornish pasties, especially if made by my mum? Wow, I'd like a mum like yours, Ken. And finally, I'm not having this. Tony says, comfort food, stuffed dates with marzipan. Remove the pips and replace them with the marzipan. Delicious. Tony, that's heresy.
Very fancy, Tony. And Alex says, cheese and beans on toast. That's very great British classic, that one. Thank you so much for your company today. Breakfast will be back tomorrow from 6 a.m. Coming up next is Bev Turner Today with Dawn Neeson.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.